The Queen. They never saw coming. How a billionaire's public betrayal unleashed the wrath of a mafia empire. The flash of 1,000 cameras. A kiss meant to destroy her. A husband who thought he'd just won everything. He didn't know the woman standing across that ballroom wasn't just his wife. She was the daughter of the man who owned the city. And in 60 seconds, she would make one phone call that would erase him from the earth. Before we begin, if this story pulls you in, drop a like, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Stay with me until the end, because what Valeria does in the final 10 minutes is something no one saw coming. The Palacio de Aurora didn't glow that night so much as it burned. A slow, deliberate burn, the kind of light that only very old money knows how to produce. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from a ceiling painted in the late 1700s, and the gold leaf along the crown molding had been restored 3 times in the last century, always by the same family in Toledo. The marble under people's shoes had been quarried before the invention of the automobile. Everything in the room was expensive in a way that didn't announce itself. It just waited for you to notice, and if you didn't, that told the room everything it needed to know about you. 600 guests had been invited. 480 had come. The rest were either dead, in Dubai, or too important to be seen at something this public. Valeria Draven counted them the way a butcher counts ribs. By feel, not by math. And she had known, walking in, that tonight was going to be the kind of night people remembered for the wrong reasons. She just hadn't known yet whose name they would remember. Senora Voss, a glass? The waiter was young, maybe 22, his accent from somewhere south of Seville. He held the tray at a careful angle, the way men held trays around her because her stillness made people nervous in a way they couldn't explain to themselves. No, thank you. A water, perhaps? I'm fine. He moved on. She watched him go. She watched everyone go. She had been watching the room for 47 minutes, which was exactly 47 minutes longer than her husband had been watching her. Julian Voss was on the other side of the ballroom, near the second fountain, laughing too hard at something an Austrian banker had said. Julian was 44 years old, handsome in a way that expensive haircuts make men handsome, and he had a laugh that he'd practiced, she was almost sure of it, in the mirror sometime during his late 20s, when he'd still been a nobody clawing up from a Bilbao suburb, and he had kept that laugh ever since because it worked on rooms like this one. It was loud without being crude. It made powerful men feel included. It made their wives look twice. Valeria knew the laugh. She had fallen in love with the laugh, once, a long time ago, in a different city, when she'd been a different person, before she'd understood what her own last name meant. She had stopped loving the laugh sometime between their 4th anniversary and their 5th. She couldn't remember the exact moment. These things happened the way erosion happens. You didn't notice the cliff falling away until one morning you looked out and the view had changed. Valeria. The voice belonged to Esperanza Mendoza Lis, a woman who had been married 4 times and widowed twice, and who wore a green dress tonight that cost more than most people's cars. Esperanza was 71 years old and terrifying and had known Valeria's mother. Esperanza. You came. I came. Alone. Julian is here somewhere. That, Esperanza said, is not the same thing. The old woman lifted her champagne. Her eyes, pale and watery, did not leave Valeria's face. There was a question in them, and beneath the question something softer, something almost like pity. And Valeria felt a small cold thing move in her stomach because Esperanza Mendoza Lis did not pity people. Esperanza had buried 2 husbands without ever once crying in public. Pity was for people who hadn't learned how the world worked yet. What do you know, Esperanza? I know what the room knows. The room knows a great many things. The room knows that your husband, Esperanza said, and she did not lower her voice because Esperanza had not lowered her voice for any reason since the Franco era, has been spending his afternoons at the Hotel Cervantes with a 26-year-old from a telenovela. Valeria's face did not move. This was something she had learned very young, in a very specific house, from a very specific man. Your face is a door. You decide who walks through it. I see. Do you? Yes. And I'm listening. Esperanza studied her for another long second. Then the old woman did something strange. She reached out. Her hand was mottled with age, the fingers bent slightly from a decade-old break that had never set right, and she touched Valeria's wrist. Just briefly. Just once. Be careful tonight, Hija. There are photographers everywhere. I do not think your husband has thought this evening through. She moved away. Her green dress caught the chandelier light and threw it back in long, shivering lines, and Valeria watched the old woman go and felt, for the first time in a long time, something close to fear. Not for herself, because she had stopped being afraid of things that happened to her around the age of 19, but for Julian, because Esperanza had never warned her about anything that wasn't already a landslide in motion. The ballroom hummed. 350 million euros of combined net worth stood between the entrance and the orchestra, and somewhere in the middle of it, her husband was making a decision that he thought was his own. Valeria moved slowly. She had worn the black dress, the one with the single silver thread along the shoulder, the one her father had sent her from Milan 3 Christmases ago, with a note that read, "Only para las noches que importan," for the nights that matter. She had not worn it since their wedding anniversary 2 years earlier. She had pulled it from the back of the closet that afternoon at 4:15, and she had known, pulling it out, that she was dressing for something, and she had not let herself ask what. Her phone buzzed once against her hip. She did not look at it. Across the room, Julian had moved. He was no longer near the fountain. He was walking, with that rolling, confident walk he'd developed after his second billion, toward the small stage at the north end of the hall, where the orchestra was finishing Debussy. There was a microphone on that stage. There had not been a microphone on the schedule. Valeria's pulse ticked up, once, behind her ear. She moved. She did not hurry. She had not hurried since she was 16 years old. But she moved, cutting through the crowd with the small practiced smiles she gave people whose names she could no longer remember. A French shipping magnate nodded at her. A Saudi woman in cobalt blue touched her arm and murmured something about her mother. Valeria answered without hearing her own voice. "Julian." She was 3 meters behind him when she said it. He didn't turn. "Julian." He heard her the second time. She saw the back of his neck tighten. He had always had a tell. When he was about to do something he knew he shouldn't, the muscles at the base of his skull went rigid, and she had learned 10 years into their marriage to watch for it the way you watch for weather. He turned his head, halfway, not enough to meet her eyes. "Valley, give me a minute." "What are you doing?" "Announcement. Quick one. Sit down. Julian, sit." He climbed the 2 shallow steps to the stage. The orchestra saw him and trailed off mid-phrase, the cellist's bow hanging suspended for a strange half-second before the sound died. Conversations around the room began to thin. People who had been laughing stopped. Phones came out. This was how it happened, in rooms like this. The herd sensed something and oriented toward it before they knew what they were looking at. Julian lifted the microphone off its stand. He was smiling. It was the wrong smile. Valeria felt it in her teeth. "Friends, amigos, give me 60 seconds of your evening." A soft murmur, a few raised glasses. "I know this is Esperanza's gala, and Esperanza te adoro." He nodded toward the old woman, who did not nod back, who stood at the edge of the crowd with her pale eyes fixed on him, and her mouth a thin, unforgiving line. "But I have something I need to say, and I would rather say it tonight, in front of the people who matter to me, than read about it in Hola tomorrow." A ripple. "For the last year and a half, I've been lying." The room went very still. Valeria stopped walking. She was 8 meters from the stage. The black dress caught the light and did not move. "I've been lying to my friends. I've been lying to my partners. I've been lying to myself. And I've been lying to my wife." A woman near the bar made a small involuntary sound. "I married Valeria Draven 11 years ago, and she is a remarkable woman. Let me say that first. She is elegant, she is intelligent, and she has been, in her own quiet way, a partner to me." He paused. He was performing. Even now, even here, some small cold part of Valeria's brain was noting the craftsmanship, the pauses, the rhythm, the way he let his voice crack just a little on partner. And she understood that he had rehearsed this. He had rehearsed it the way he rehearsed earnings calls. But the heart, Julian said, does not listen to gratitude. He turned toward the side of the stage. A girl stepped out from behind the red velvet curtain. She was very beautiful in the way young women become beautiful when they are photographed for a living. The symmetry of her face almost unreal, her collarbones polished, her hair a shade of honey that did not occur in nature. She was wearing a white dress. It was the wrong color for the room. Valeria noticed this with the part of her mind that noticed everything, and she understood, seeing it, that the girl had chosen the dress herself, that she had been told she would be appearing, and that she had believed, because someone had told her, because Julian had told her, that the white dress would make her look like a bride. Julian reached for the girl's hand. "This," he said into the microphone, and the whole room heard the exact moment he stopped being a husband and became something else, "is Camila, and I love her." He kissed her, on the mouth, in front of 480 people. The flashes started before their lips parted. Somewhere, a glass hit the floor and shattered, and nobody moved to clean it up. A woman Valeria had known since school, a woman whose name was Pilar, and who had held Valeria's hand at her own mother's funeral, turned her head slowly and looked at Valeria with her mouth open. Pilar did not know what her face was doing. None of them did. The whole room had gone blank with the specific shock of watching a man with that much money do something that stupid in that much light. Valeria did not move. She counted. 1, 2, 3. At 3, she let herself feel it. The hot, small, sick flare behind her sternum, the thing that a younger version of herself might have let become tears. She felt it, she named it, and she set it down. She set it down the way her father had taught her to set things down. In a back room of their house in Cadiz, when she was 11 years old, and her puppy had died and she had been crying, and her father had knelt in front of her and said, "Mija, you can cry now, or you can cry later, but you cannot cry both. Choose." She had chosen later. She chose later again. The kiss ended. Julian lifted his head. He was smiling that laugh smile, that room smile, and then his eyes found her, across the ballroom, across 8 meters of stunned marble and stunned people. And for a single second she watched his face do something he hadn't planned on. It faltered. The smile stayed, but the eyes underneath it didn't, and Valeria understood that he had expected her to already be gone. He had expected her to have fled. The whole announcement had been staged around the assumption that she would flinch first. She had not flinched, and now he didn't know what to do with her. "Valley," he said into the microphone, and his voice had a small catch in it that was not rehearsed. "I'm sorry. I didn't want you to find out this way." The room turned, 480 faces turning at once, like a field of sunflowers tracking a very slow sun, and Valeria Draven stood at the center of that field in her black dress with the single silver thread, and she did not move, and she did not speak, and she did not cry. She smiled. It was a small smile, a polite smile. The smile she used for ambassadors and for doormen and for the waiters who brought her water she didn't want. It was the smile she had learned from her father, and her father had learned it from his father. And somewhere 4 generations back, a man named Draven had come down from the Asturian mountains with nothing but that smile and a knife. And he had built a house with them both. The flashes found her. The phones found her. Somebody, a columnist from El País she would learn later, had the presence of mind to record her, and it was that recording that would be uploaded to the internet at 11:47 p.m. Madrid time, and that would be watched 40 million times before sunrise in Tokyo. In the recording, Valeria Draven stands absolutely still. She smiles. She nods, once, at her husband, and then she turns, without hurry, and walks out of the frame. The corridor behind the ballroom was cooler than the hall by about 3 degrees. Valeria felt the temperature change on her bare shoulders and let herself finally exhale. "Señora." The voice belonged to Mateo. Mateo had been her driver for 9 years. Before that, he had been her father's driver for 11. Before that, he had been something else, something that was never discussed, something that had left a small pale scar on the left side of his jaw, that his beard almost, but not quite, covered. He was 53 years old, and he was waiting for her in the corridor because Mateo was always where she needed him to be, 30 seconds before she needed him. "Mateo, the car is at the side entrance." "Good. Your father called twice while you were inside." "I know." "He saw." She stopped walking. "Already?" Mateo's face did not change, but something behind his eyes moved, the way deep water moves under a still surface. "Señora." It was broadcast. Broadcast. A guest streamed it, From inside. It was on 3 networks before the kiss ended. Valeria closed her eyes. It was not that her father would be angry. Her father did not get angry. Her father had not raised his voice in her presence since the winter she was 13, and even that had been a miscalculation. He had apologized for the next morning with a quiet, formal bow that had frightened her more than the shouting. Her father did not operate in anger. Her father operated in silence and in arithmetic, and in the long-term patience of a man who had waited out 3 Spanish prime ministers and outlived 2 popes. But he would have seen. He would have watched his only daughter be humiliated on live television in front of the Spanish elite. And the math of that was simple and terrible, and Valeria understood it the way a sailor understands a barometer that has started to drop. "I need to call him," she said. He said no. "What?" He said no, tell her not to call me tonight. He said he would come to her tomorrow at the Calle Almagro house at noon. He said tomorrow. "Yes, señora." "He told you no." "Yes, señora." Mateo's voice did not change, but Valeria understood what he was telling her. Her father had said tomorrow because tonight he was busy. Tonight he was already working. Tonight, while his daughter walked out of the Palacio de Aurora in a black dress, Augusto Draven was picking up 3 phones in a dim-lit office on Calle Serrano and beginning, without raising his voice, to take the world apart. Her hand, when she lifted it to her own cheek, was not shaking. Good. "Take me home, Mateo." "The penthouse or the Calle Almagro house, señora?" She thought about it. The penthouse was hers and Julian's. Her clothes were there, her books, the small Goya drawing her father had given her for her 30th birthday that Julian had once called creepy, and that she had moved, after that, to her own private dressing room, where he never went. The penthouse was her married life. The penthouse was Julian's, too. The Calle Almagro house was her father's. Her grandmother had died there. She herself had been born there, in an upstairs bedroom, on a bad winter night in 1989. While her father paced a corridor and smoked cigarettes, he was not supposed to be smoking. The Calle Almagro house was where the family went when the family had work to do. Almagro. "Yes, señora." "Juan." The car was a black Mercedes with windows the color of oil. Mateo held the door. She slid in. The door closed with the heavy thunk of armor plating, a sound she had stopped hearing consciously a decade ago, and that tonight she heard again, for the first time in years, because tonight the world had become a place in which armor plating was a thing she was once more paying attention to. Her phone was ringing. It had been ringing, she realized, for a while. She looked at the screen. 43 missed calls. She scrolled. Her assistant? Her lawyer? 2 of her cousins. A friend from Barcelona. Her father's secretary? Twice. A private number she recognized as belonging to a journalist at El Mundo who had been trying to get an interview with her for 2 years. Another private number. Another. And Julian. 11 times. She looked at his name on the screen for a long moment. Then she set the phone face down on the leather seat beside her. Outside the window, Madrid was moving. The Mercedes slid through the wet streets of the Salamanca district, past the lit windows of shops she'd walked past 1,000 times, past the small late-night bar where she and Julian had gone on their second date. 11.5 years ago, when he had been a man with 200 million euros to his name and a suit that didn't quite fit in the shoulders, and a laugh she had not yet learned to distrust. She felt for just a moment the specific grief of that. The grief of the girl she had been in that bar. The grief of believing, at 25, that a man who made her laugh was the same thing as a man who would be kind to her. It passed. She had, she reminded herself, been raised to outlive grief. Her father had taught her, and her mother before she died had taught her, and the long, silent, watchful women who had come before her mother had taught her, and what they had all taught her was the same thing. You are not allowed to be surprised by men, mija. You are allowed to be disappointed, but never surprised. She had been disappointed tonight. She had not been surprised. And that, she understood, was the worst part, because some small corner of her show, some younger, foolish, unburned corner of her, had held out for 11 years the secret idiot hope that Julian would, in the end, turn out to be different from what the women in her family had always said men were. He had not turned out to be different. He had turned out to be exactly what her father had told her he was, 3 months before the wedding, when her father had sat across from her at the breakfast table in the Calle Almagro house and had said, "Mija, I will not stop you. But I will tell you one thing. That man does not know who we are. And a man who does not know who you are marries only the shape of you, not the weight. She had married Julian anyway. She had spent 11 years proving her father wrong. She had failed. The Mercedes turned on to the Paseo de la Castellana. The lights of the city blurred against the wet glass. Her phone rang again. She picked it up this time because she saw the name. Papa. Mija. His voice was the same as always, low, slow. The Castilian of a man who had not been born in Madrid, but who had decided at 17 that Madrid would belong to him and who had spent the next half-century making that decision true. You said tomorrow. I know what I said. I'm calling now. Papa, listen to me. She listened. I am not going to ask you how you are. I know how you are. You are my daughter. You are sitting in Mateo's car and you are not crying because you do not cry. And somewhere inside your chest you are doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic is telling you something you do not want to know. Yes? She said nothing. Yes, mija? Yes, papa. Good. A pause. In the pause she heard, very faintly, the scratch of a pen against paper. He was writing something. He was writing something while he talked to her, the way he had always written things while he talked to her, because her father was a man who did not waste the 90 seconds of a phone call. Now, I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to answer it the way I taught you, not fast, not slow, the truth. All right. Do you want him broken? The Mercedes was passing the Prado Museum. She saw, in the rain, the dark bulk of it, the columns, the stone. She thought of the Goya in her dressing room. She thought of Julian calling it creepy. She thought of the white dress the girl had worn onto the stage, and the way Julian had kissed that girl, and the way the flashes had fired and fired and fired. She thought of the 11 years. She thought of the ring on her finger, which was still there, which she had not yet removed because she was Augusto Draven's daughter, and she did not do things in anger, she did them in sequence. She thought about the question her father had asked her. Do you want him broken? It was, she understood, a real question. Her father had never once in her life asked her a question he already knew the answer to. He was asking because he wanted to know. He was asking because the answer mattered. He was asking because what she said in the next 5 seconds would set in motion a series of events that could not, once started, be called back. She thought of Julian on that stage, with the microphone in his hand, with his smile, with the way he had said, I didn't want you to find out this way, as if the betrayal were the problem, as if the mechanism of her discovery were the problem, as if he believed even now, even standing there in front of 480 people, that the worst thing he had done was the timing. He did not know. He did not know what she was. He did not know what her father was. He had not, in 11 years of marriage, ever once asked her where the money came from. The money that had arrived, quietly, at exactly the right moment, in every deal he had ever closed. The port contract in Valencia, the mining concession in Chile, the Greek shipping deal that had made him, in 2019, a billionaire. Julian had walked through an 11-year-long corridor of open doors and had never once turned around to see who was opening them. She had opened them. Her father had opened them. Julian had walked through them and had called the walking genius. Yes, Valeria said, I want him broken. Her father was quiet for a moment. All right, mija. All of it. All of it. Everything he has. Everything he was going to have. Everything he thinks he is. Yes. The girl, too. A small pause. The girl is a child. The girl is 26 years old and stupid. The girl kissed my husband on a stage, Papa, in front of my face. The girl did what she was told. The girl will lose everything she has by default because she is attached to him. Do not spend anger on the girl. Spend it where it matters. Valeria closed her eyes. He was right. He was almost always right. All right. Him then. Only him. Only him. Good. Now listen to me. I need you to do 3 things tonight, and then I need you to sleep because tomorrow is going to be long. Tell me. 1. Do not go to the penthouse. Go to Almagro. Mateo already knows. Yes. 2. When you get to Almagro, the study is open. There is a folder on the desk. It is green. Read it tonight. Read all of it. Do not skim. Do you understand me, mija? Do not skim. A folder. A green folder. What's in it? 11 years of your husband, mija. The rain was heavier now against the window. You kept a folder. I kept a folder. On Julian. On Julian. For 11 years. For 11 years. She didn't say anything. Mija! Her father's voice softened, fractionally, by the exact amount his voice ever softened, which was not much. I told you. A man who does not know who you are marries only the shape of you. I told you this. And you married him anyway, which was your right, and I loved you enough to let you do it. But I did not love you enough to do nothing. I am your father. I kept the folder. She felt for the first time that night a burning behind her eyes. Not tears, something older than tears, something she could not afford tonight. She pressed it down. What is the third thing, Papa? The third thing is the most important. Tell me. The third thing is that when you read the folder, mija, and when you come to the end of it, I want you to remember something. And I want you to remember it every day for the next 6 months, because the next 6 months are going to be difficult for you, in ways you have not yet understood. Tell me. Remember that your name is Draven. The line was quiet. Your name is Draven, her father said again softly. And before you were his wife, you were my daughter. And before you were my daughter, mija, you were yourself. And what is about to happen to Julian Voss? What is already happening to him at this exact moment, in 14 different cities, in ways he is not yet aware of, is not being done by me. She was holding the phone very tightly. Papa, it is being done by you. I am only the hand. You are the weight. The Mercedes slowed. They were turning onto Calle Almagro. Through the rain-streaked window, she could see the iron gate, and the 2 men in dark coats beside it, and the single lit window on the 3rd floor of the old house, the window of her father's study, where a lamp had been burning since she was a child, and where, she understood now fully, for the first time in her life, a lamp had always been burning for her. Papa. Yes, mija. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. Why not? A small pause. Very small. Because, mija, her father said, and she could hear somewhere behind his voice the scratch of his pen again, writing something onto a piece of paper that she would probably never see. You have not yet read the folder. The line went dead. The gate opened before the car reached it. Mateo did not slow. The Mercedes rolled through the iron, and behind them the gate closed, and the 2 men in dark coats stepped back into the shadows of the courtyard and became once again part of the architecture. Valeria sat in the back seat with the phone dark in her lap. She was thinking about the folder. She was thinking about Julian, somewhere in the city, probably still at the Palacio de Aurora, probably still holding the microphone, probably still trying to understand why his wife had smiled. She was thinking about the girl in the white dress, whose name was Camila, whose life had ended an hour ago in a way she did not yet know. She was thinking about her father in the upstairs study, with his pen and his phones and his long, patient, terrible arithmetic. And she was thinking, with a clarity that surprised her, that felt almost physical, the way the first cold morning of autumn feels physical, that she had been wrong for 11 years about what kind of woman she was. She had thought she was a wife who had a powerful father. She was not. She was a daughter who had, for a little while, tried on the costume of a wife. The costume had been expensive, and she had worn it well. But it had always been a costume. It had always been something she had put on in the morning and taken off at night. And Julian, poor fool, Julian who had kissed a 26-year-old on a stage in front of 480 people, Julian had made the one mistake no man had ever made before him. He had tried to humiliate the costume. He had not understood that there was a woman underneath. Mateo opened the door. Señora. She stepped out into the rain. The drops were cold on her bare shoulders. The silver thread on her dress caught the light from the lamp above the door and threw it back in a single long, shivering line. Señora, the study. I know. She walked up the 3 shallow stone steps. The door opened before she touched it. A woman in a gray dress, maybe 60, who had worked for her father since before Valeria was born, stood in the doorway with her eyes lowered. Señora. Gloria. Your father is on the phones. I know. The study is prepared. There is a fire. There is tea if you want it. There is brandy. Brandy, please? Yes, senora. Valeria walked past her. Through the entry hall with its black and white marble, past the long mirror in which, 11.5 years ago, in a different dress, she had checked her lipstick before going down to meet Julian for their engagement dinner, past the curved staircase up which her grandmother had walked 10,000 times, up to the landing, down the corridor, to the study door which stood open. The fire was lit. The lamp was burning. The green folder was on the desk. It was thicker than she had expected. She crossed the room. She sat down in her father's chair, not her mother's chair, not the chair by the window where she had sat as a child and read Borges while her father worked, but his chair, the big one, the one with the cracked leather arms. She sat down in it the way a queen sits down on a throne she has never before been told was hers. She pulled the folder toward her, she opened it, and she began slowly to read. Somewhere across the city, at that exact moment, Julian Voss was standing in the emptying ballroom of the Palacio de Aurora with a microphone still in his hand, trying to call 3 different business partners, none of whom were picking up. He did not know yet, because nobody had yet told him, that his chief of staff in Valencia had received, at 11:51 p.m., a single phone call from a number he did not recognize, and that after that phone call, his chief of staff had quietly walked out of the office without his coat and had not come back. He did not know about the chief of staff. He did not know about the Greek. He did not know about the Chilean. He did not know that at 12:04 a.m. in Rotterdam, a container ship carrying 40 million euros of his copper had been quietly, administratively, and without explanation, held at the port. He did not know any of this yet. He was still, at that moment, trying to smile. He was still trying to explain to the Austrian banker that this had all been handled, that Valley would understand, that Valley always understood, that Valley was the most reasonable woman he had ever met. The Austrian banker excused himself to take a call. The Austrian banker did not come back. And in the Calle Almagro house, in a room where a lamp had been burning for 36 years, Valeria Draven turned the first page of the green folder and began, quietly and without hurry, to learn exactly who she had married. The rain fell on the city. The fire burned in the grate, and Madrid, for the first time in a long time, held its breath. The first page of this folder was a photograph. It was not a photograph she had expected. She had expected perhaps a document, a contract, a bank statement, one of the small, careful pieces of paper her father used when he was telling a story with numbers. Instead, it was a photograph of Julian. He was younger in it, 32, maybe 33. He was standing on a sidewalk in a city that Valeria did not at first recognize, in a coat that was 2 sizes too big for him, and he was shaking hands with a man she had never seen before. The man was older, 60 maybe, heavy around the shoulders in the way certain men from certain parts of Naples got heavy, as if the weight had been earned rather than acquired. The man's face was turned partly away from the camera, but Valeria could see enough of it to understand that whoever had taken this photograph had taken it without being asked. She turned the page. Underneath, in her father's small, precise handwriting, a single line. Milan, April 2013, 2 months before he met you. She went still. She had met Julian in June of 2013, at a benefit dinner in Barcelona at the Hotel Arts. Under a chandelier she still remembered because one of the crystals had been broken and she had spent the entire evening unable to stop looking at it. He had sat 3 seats away from her. He had leaned across the woman between them and had asked, in a voice that was pitched exactly low enough that only Valeria could hear it, whether she also thought the soup was terrible. She had laughed. She had laughed, and she had thought, at the time, that the laugh was the beginning of something. She understood now that the laugh had been the middle of something. The beginning had been 2 months earlier, on a sidewalk in Milan in a coat that was 2 sizes too big, with a man from Naples whose name she did not yet know. She kept reading. The second page was a document. It was a bank transfer record from a small private bank in Lugano, dated the same week as the photograph. 40,000 euros from the Neapolitan's account to Julian's, with a memo line that read in Italian, Consulenza Strategica, strategic consulting. She turned the page. Another transfer. 2 weeks later. 60,000 euros. Same sender, same memo line. She turned the page. Another. By the time she reached May of 2013, the month before she met Julian, the month before the soup joke, the month before the laugh, the Neapolitan had moved just under 400,000 euros into Julian's personal accounts. And Julian, who had told her on their third date that he had built his first business entirely on his own, with nothing but an overdraft and my grandmother's rosary, had apparently been doing a great deal of strategic consulting for a man whose photograph, she would learn 3 pages later, appeared in an Interpol bulletin from 2011. Gloria came in with the brandy. Valeria did not look up. "Thank you, Gloria." "Senora, do you need anything else?" "No." "The fire?" "Leave it." Gloria left. The door closed behind her with the soft click of old hinges. Valeria picked up the brandy. She took a small, careful swallow. She set the glass down exactly where it had been. She turned another page. At the Palacio de Aurora, across the city, Julian Voss was still holding the microphone. He had not meant to be holding the microphone. The orchestra had started up again at some point in the last 5 minutes, and there was a waltz playing. The conductor had defaulted to the waltz the way a triage nurse defaults to pressure on a bleeding wound, because the waltz was what you played when you didn't know what else to play. And Julian was standing next to the stage with the microphone still in his hand, and nobody had come to take it from him. The girl, Camilla, was clinging to his arm. She was talking. She had been talking for a while. She was saying something about how everyone was being so unfair, how they didn't understand, how real love was real love. And Julian was not listening, because Julian was looking at the door through which his wife had walked 8 minutes ago, and he was trying to understand what had just happened to his life. "Baby," Camilla said. "Baby, look at me. Not now. Baby, not now, Camilla." He pulled his arm free. He did not mean to pull it as hard as he did. He saw, in the half-second after, the small flicker of hurt that went across her face, the flicker of a young woman who had been in love with the idea of being in love with a billionaire, and who was beginning to understand, perhaps for the first time, that a billionaire who was rude to her in public was a different species of animal than a billionaire who was rude to her in private. He did not have time for her hurt. He lifted his phone. He called Ramon. Ramon was his chief of staff in Valencia. Ramon had been with him for 9 years. Ramon answered his phone on the first ring, always, had answered on the first ring every single time Julian had called him for 9 years. And tonight, the phone went to voicemail. Julian looked at the screen. He called again. Voicemail. "Ramon, it's me. Call me. Call me now. Chimmy. Call her." He hung up. He called Diego, his lawyer, the one in Madrid, not the one in London. Diego answered on the 4th ring. Diego's voice sounded strange. Wrong. "Julian." "Diego, where the hell is Ramon?" "Julian, we need to talk." "We are talking." "Not on the phone." "Diego, what the hell is happening? Why is nobody—" "Not on the phone, Julian. I'm coming to you. Where are you?" "I'm at the Aurora." "Don't move." "Diego." The line went dead. Julian stood with the phone in his hand and looked at it, and for the first time in the 11.5 years since he had met Valeria Draven, he felt the specific thin, cold feeling of a man who has walked into a room he does not know the shape of. He dialed another number. The Austrian banker. Voicemail. He dialed Ramon again. Voicemail. He dialed his own secretary. She picked up on the second ring. "Senor Voss?" "Elena, where is Ramon?" I don't know, Senor Voss." "What do you mean you don't know?" "He left the office." "When?" "About 40 minutes ago." And he hasn't come back. He didn't take his coat. His phone is on his desk." Julian closed his eyes. "Elena, listen to me very carefully. I need you to call the Valencia port office. I need you to check on the Rotterdam shipment." The Rotterdam shipment?" "Yes." "Senor Voss, the port office called here 20 minutes ago." "And?" "They said the shipment has been held." "Held?" "Yes." "By whom?" A pause. In the pause, Julian could hear his own heartbeat very clearly in his left ear. "They didn't say." "Elena." "They didn't say, Senor Voss. They said it was an administrative hold. They said the paperwork was being reviewed. They said there was nothing we could do tonight." Julian ended the call. He stood in the emptying ballroom of the Palacio de Aurora, under a ceiling painted in the late 1700s, with a microphone in one hand and a phone in the other, and a 26-year-old actress staring at the back of his head. And he understood, with the cold, specific understanding of a man who has spent his life watching markets, that something was moving. Something was moving somewhere in the dark, somewhere beneath the surface of his world, and it was moving fast, and it was moving toward him. He just didn't know yet that it had already arrived. In the study on Calle Almagro, Valeria was on page 42. The folder had stopped being about Julian around page 30. The folder, she understood now, had become about her. Page 30 was a photograph of herself taken from across a restaurant, at a lunch she had had 2 years ago with a French investor she had introduced to Julian. The photograph had been taken from maybe 15 meters away, through a window at a slight angle. She was smiling in it. The investor was leaning forward. Underneath, in her father's handwriting, "You made him 200 million euros that afternoon, mija. He thanked you by taking the girl to Ibiza the following weekend." Page 31. Another photograph. Another lunch. Another introduction. Another subsequent weekend. Page 32. Page 33. Page 34. By page 37, she had stopped reading the dates. She did not need to read the dates. She remembered every one of those lunches. She remembered the French investor and the Lebanese shipping family and the Argentine woman who had controlled a third of the lithium concessions in the Salta province and who had handed Julian a €500 million supply contract because Valeria had spent 3 afternoons at the woman's horse ranch outside Mendoza listening to her talk about her dead brother. Valeria had brought Julian every single deal that had made him a billionaire. She had known this. She had always known this. What she had not known, what she was learning now, page by slow, deliberate page, in her father's handwriting, was the other column. The column her father had been keeping in parallel. The column of what Julian had been doing on those same weekends, in the same months, in the same years, while his wife was quietly building him an empire. The Ibiza weekend was not the first girl. The Ibiza weekend was the 7th. Valeria took another small, careful swallow of brandy. She turned the page. The door to the study opened at 1:14 a.m. Her father came in without knocking, because it was his house and his study, and because he had never in 36 years knocked on a door behind which his daughter was sitting. Augusto Draven was 68 years old. He was a tall man, still, age had not yet bent him, with white hair cut close to the skull, and a face that had been compared more than once to a hawk that had been carved out of stone by a sculptor who was having a bad day. He was wearing a dark gray suit and no tie. His collar was open. His hands, which he held loosely at his sides as he crossed the room, were the hands of a man who had worked once with his hands and who had not forgotten. He came to the desk. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the folder. "How far?" "Page 61. "You're almost done." "I know." He sat down. Not in the chair across from her. He did not take the supplicant's chair in his own study. He had never taken that chair in his own study, but on the edge of the desk, at an angle, so that his shoulder was almost but not quite touching hers. He did not speak for a long time. When he spoke, it was not about the folder. "Your mother," Augusto said, "would have been angry with me tonight." Valeria looked up from the page. "Why?" "Because I let him live this long." She said nothing. "She told me," her father said, and his voice was quiet, "a month before she died. She said, 'Augusto, that boy is going to hurt our daughter.' And I said, 'Amalia, she is 25 years old and she loves him. What do you want me to do?' And your mother said—" He stopped. He looked at the fire. He did not look at Valeria. "Your mother said, 'I want you to promise me that when he does, you will not be slow.'" The fire cracked once, and a small piece of wood shifted. "I have been slow, mija. Papa, I've been slow for 11 years. I've been watching him build on your back, and I've been telling myself, 'She is happy. She thinks she is happy. It is not my place.' And tonight he stood on a stage with a child actress, and he kissed her, in front of your face, in front of cameras, and I understood that I was wrong. I have been wrong for 11 years. You were not wrong. I was. Papa, I chose him." Augusto looked at her. His eyes, which were gray and very pale in certain lights, were not pale tonight. They were the color of cold iron. You chose him, mija, yes, but I let him. And those are two different things, and tonight I'm going to correct one of them. He reached across the desk and touched the green folder. Not a hard touch, a light, almost affectionate touch, the way a man might touch a photograph. Do not read the rest of it tonight. Why? Because there are 3 pages at the end that will not help you sleep, and you need to sleep. You will read them in the morning. Papa, in the morning, mija. She closed the folder. She did not ask what was in the 3 pages. She understood, without being told, that her father was in one of his rare moods, the mood of a man who had decided something, who had already begun a process, and who was now managing, as he always managed, the parts of it that involved the people he loved. He had always done this. When her mother had been dying in the summer of 2008, he had managed Valeria's grief the same way. He had let her know the things she needed to know. He had kept from her the things that would not help. He had waited, and he had chosen, and he had never once in his life lied to her, but there were things he had not told her, and Valeria had understood, even as a teenager, that the not telling was its own kind of love. All right, she said. Good. Papa. Yes, mija. Tell me what's happening. Augusto was quiet for a moment. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a small notebook. He opened it. He did not need to read from it. He never needed to read from his notebooks. He carried them as punctuation. But he opened it. Rotterdam is holding his copper. I know. Valencia has lost its chief of staff. Ramon is in a car on his way to Zaragoza. He will not be returning to Valencia. He will not be working for Julian again. He will, however, be available to testify to certain financial irregularities he observed in the Valencia office between 2018 and 2021, should any judicial body ever become interested. Papa. Mija. Did you? I did not threaten him. Then how? I offered him a better job. He took it. The better job has one condition. The condition is that he cooperate fully with any future legal process regarding Julian. He accepted. He is, by the way, a good man, Ramon. He has been uncomfortable for several years. We are doing him a kindness. Valeria thought about Ramon. A quiet man. A man who had come to dinner at the penthouse once. A man whose wife had been shy and had spent most of the evening looking at the floor. What else? The Greeks have frozen the Piraeus contract. The Chileans have quietly pulled out of the lithium extension. The Austrian has told his board that Voss Holdings is, and I am using his exact word here, unpredictable, which in the Austrian's language means contagious, and by Monday morning, 7 other funds will have heard it. By Monday morning. By Monday morning, mija, your husband will discover that he has a liquidity problem. And after that, a credit problem. And after that, Augusto closed the notebook. After that, we will see. But I will tell you this, mija. He looked at her. I'm not going to destroy him in one night. That would be a kindness. I'm going to let him watch it happen. I'm going to let him pick up his phone every morning for the next 90 days and call the men who used to return his calls, and I'm going to let him listen to the silence. I'm going to let him understand, piece by piece, that every room he used to be welcome in is closed to him now. I am going to let him understand why. Bo, yo, ye. And then? And then, when he understands, when he has understood so completely that he comes at last to the only door that is still open to him, he will come to this house. He will come up these stairs. He will come into this study, and he will ask me to stop. And you will not stop. I will not stop. But you will let him ask. I will let him ask. Valeria was silent. Her father watched her. In the lamplight, the lines of his face were deeper than usual. He looked, for a moment, like his own father. A man Valeria remembered only from 3 blurry visits to a house outside Oviedo. A man who had sat at the head of a long table and had eaten soup in silence and had pressed a single gold coin into her palm when she was 6. Mija. Yes. There is something I need you to do. Tell me. Tomorrow morning, at 11, there will be a press conference. It will be held at the offices of Voss Holdings on Calle Serrano, because the building belongs to Julian, and I want the press conference held in his own building. Do you understand me? I want this done on his ground. I want the photographs of it to be in front of his own logo. Who is giving the press conference? You are. She stared at him. What? You are, mija. Papa, You will read a statement. The statement will be short. It will not mention me. It will not mention your family. It will not mention, in any direct way, the events of tonight. The statement will say that as of 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, you are filing for divorce from Julian Voss, citing incompatibility, and that you are stepping down from your unofficial advisory role in Voss Holdings, effective immediately. It will say that you wish him well. It will say nothing else. Papa, if I go in front of cameras tomorrow, the cameras are going to be there whether you go or not. The question is whether they photograph you or whether they photograph him. And I am telling you, mija, that tomorrow, for the first time in 11 years, the photograph is going to be of you. He stood up. I have written the statement. It is downstairs on the table in the blue room. Read it. If you want to change a word, change it. If you want to change every word, change every word. I don't care. But read it tonight and practice it. And at 11 o'clock tomorrow, you will stand in front of those cameras, and you will not cry, and you will not smile, and you will be a draven. And then, mija, you will come home, and we will begin. He walked to the door. At the door he stopped. He did not turn around. Valeria. It was the first time he had used her full name all night. He almost never did. He had called her mija since she was 4 days old, since the morning her mother had first placed her in his arms, and he had said, with the awkward terror of a man who had never held a child before, Mija, this is your father, and I will try very hard not to be a disappointment to you. Yes, Papa. Your mother was a better woman than I have ever been. I know, and she loved you more than she loved anything in the world, including me, which is as it should be. I know. And tonight, when I picked up the phone and I began to do what I am doing, I did it for her. Not only for her, but partly for her. Do you understand me, mija? Yes, Papa. Good. He opened the door. Sleep, mija. There is a lot to do tomorrow. The door closed. She sat for a long time in his chair. The fire burned down. Somewhere outside, a car horn, very faint. Somewhere much further away, the sound of a church bell counting 2. At 2:04 a.m., she picked up the green folder. She closed it. She set it at the exact center of her father's desk, square with the edges, the way her father liked things to be left. She stood. She blew out the lamp. She walked downstairs to the blue room to read the statement. By 3 in the morning, the news had crossed the Atlantic. In New York, a junior analyst at a hedge fund that held a large position in a Spanish industrial group, a group that had, as of 48 hours ago, been in final negotiations with Voss Holdings on a cross-border merger, was sitting at his desk eating cold dumplings and refreshing his screen, and he saw, 3 times in the space of 90 seconds, the same thing. A flag on the merger, a quiet note from compliance, a third thing from a Spanish regulatory feed that he could not parse in translation. He called his boss. His boss was at a bar. His boss said, "What the hell, Dan? It's 10 p.m." And Dan said, "Boss, I think we have a problem with the Voss merger." And his boss said, "What kind of problem?" And Dan said, "I don't know yet, but it looks bad, and I'm seeing it from 3 different sides." His boss paid his tab and went home. By 4 a.m. New York time, 10 a.m. Madrid time, the hedge fund had begun to quietly, carefully, methodically reduce its exposure to anything adjacent to Voss Holdings. They were not the only ones. A private bank in Geneva had already done the same thing, at 2 in the morning Swiss time, after a phone call that the bank's senior partner had taken in his dressing gown. A family office in Monaco had done it at 4. A Dubai sovereign sub-fund had flagged the name for review at 5. None of these moves were large enough, individually, to move the market. Together, they formed a small, tight weather system. The weather system was moving toward Julian Voss. Julian Voss was, at that moment, in the penthouse on Calle Velázquez, sitting on the edge of his own bed with his shoes still on, watching his phone. The girl, Camilla, was in the bathroom. She had been in the bathroom for 35 minutes. He could hear her crying, intermittently, through the door. He had stopped trying to talk to her around minute 12. Diego, his lawyer, was sitting in the armchair across from him. Diego was a small, bald, very thin man of 51, who had represented Julian for 9 years and who had made, in those 9 years, approximately 14 million euros in fees. He was holding a glass of water. He was not drinking it. Julian. Diego. I need you to tell me the truth about something. Okay. Your wife. What about her? Julian. Diego, I've had a long night. Just say it. Diego set the glass down. Who is your wife's father? Julian blinked. Augusto. Augusto Draven. He's a businessman, Diego. You've met him. You had dinner with us 3 Christmases ago at the... Julian. What? I need you to tell me that you have really believed for 11 years that Augusto Draven is a businessman. Julian looked at him. There was a small moment in the dim light of the penthouse bedroom in which Julian Voss's face did something that Diego had never seen it do before. It went blank. Not the calculated blankness of a negotiator. Something else. Something that looked to Diego almost like the face of a man who has just realized in the middle of a dark street that the figure walking behind him has been walking behind him for a long time. He's in logistics, real estate, some ports, some... What are you saying, Diego? Julian. Say it. Diego drew a slow, careful breath. Julian, in the last 4 hours I have spoken to 3 people. All 3 of them are people I would, until tonight, have considered friends. Not one of them was willing to stay on the phone with me for more than 90 seconds. One of them, Ignacio, you know Ignacio, he has been at your birthday every year. One of them told me, and I am quoting him exactly, Diego, I cannot be seen helping you on this. You do not understand what you have stepped into. You do not understand whose daughter she is. Those were his words. Ignacio said that. Ignacio said that. Ignacio is being dramatic. Julian, he is not being dramatic. Diego, Julian gestured vaguely. She's Valeria. She reads. She does her horses. What are you telling me? I'm telling you, Diego said, that somebody in this city is very angry with you tonight. And I am telling you that the people I have called, people I have known for 20 years, are acting like men who have just been told to stand far away from you. And I am telling you that the only explanation that makes those 3 calls line up is that whoever that somebody is, they are not the kind of somebody whose name you write in a press release. Julian stood up. He walked to the window. The Calle Velázquez was wet below. A single taxi was idling at the corner, its roof light off, its engine running. He had not noticed the taxi before. He noticed it now. He noticed also that the doorman on the sidewalk was standing in a slightly different place than he usually stood, and that the man at the newspaper kiosk, who never worked nights, was standing behind the kiosk even though the kiosk was closed. He had always said to himself that he was a man who noticed things. He was noticing now. Diego. Yes. How bad is this? Julian. How bad? Diego was quiet for a long moment. I don't know yet, Diego said finally, but I will tell you this. At 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, your wife is going to file for divorce. I know this because her lawyer called me an hour ago, professionally, to inform me of it. Her lawyer is not Miguel Ortega, who has represented her in family matters for 6 years. Her lawyer is Rafael Santarén. Do you know who that is? No, of course you don't. Rafael Santarén does not represent individuals. Rafael Santarén represents 3 Spanish banking families, 2 sovereign wealth funds, and the Archbishop of Toledo. He has not taken an individual client since 2006. Tonight, Julian, he took one. Tonight, at midnight on a Saturday, Rafael Santarén personally picked up the phone and personally informed me that as of 9 a.m. tomorrow, he would be filing divorce papers on behalf of Valeria Draven. Julian stared at the wet street. And, Diego said, there is a press conference at 11. Julian turned. What? A press conference at 11. In your building, Julian. At the Calle Serrano offices. Valeria is going to give a statement. In my building. In your building. Why is she... Julian. Why is she doing it in my building? Julian, listen to me. She is doing it in your building because whoever is helping her has decided that she is going to be photographed tomorrow morning in front of your logo. Do you understand me? Tomorrow, every newspaper in Europe is going to print a photograph of Valeria Draven standing in front of the word Voss. And the caption of that photograph is going to say that she is leaving you. And the reader of that photograph is going to understand, without being told, that the word behind her is not hers anymore. It is not even yours anymore. It is something that is about to be taken apart. Julian felt, for the first time since the microphone, something move in his chest that was not anger. It was a small cold thing. It was roughly the size of a walnut. It sat neatly behind the place where his sternum met his throat. It was fear. He had not felt it in a long time. He had forgotten a little what it was shaped like. Diego. Yes. Get me on a plane. Diego closed his eyes for just a second, then he opened them again. Julian. Get me on a plane. Tonight. Now. The Gulf Stream. Julian. London or Zurich. Somewhere I can think. Somewhere I can... Julian, the Gulf Stream is grounded. Julian stared at him. What? The Gulf Stream. I called the hangar at Torrejon 20 minutes ago. Your flight crew has been informed that the aircraft is under a maintenance hold, effective tonight. A maintenance hold. That's what they told me. The plane is fine, Diego. I flew it to Mallorca 3 days ago. I know. Then what maintenance hold? Julian. Diego's voice had gone very quiet. The plane is fine. There is no maintenance hold. Someone has called the hangar and someone has told them that the plane is not to move tonight. Do you understand me? Someone. The walnut in Julian's chest got colder. In the bathroom, the sound of the shower starting. The girl had given up crying. She was washing off her makeup. She was washing off the evening. Julian walked back to the bed. He sat down. His knees felt, for the first time in years, like the knees of a younger man. A Bilbao suburb man. A man who had once, at 24, watched his father be evicted from a small apartment by 3 men who had not been kind about it. He had not thought about his father's eviction in a very long time. He thought about it now. Diego. Yes. What do I do? Diego looked at him. For 9 years, Diego had been paid to tell Julian Voss what to do. He had told him what to do about tax authorities in 4 countries, about 2 mistresses, about 1 insider trading inquiry that had been quietly closed, about a car accident in Formentera in 2018 that had not made the papers because Diego had not allowed it to make the papers. Tonight, Diego looked at his client, and Diego did something he had never done before in 9 years. Diego shook his head. I don't know, Julian. Diego, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know what you do. I don't think there is a thing to do tonight. I think you sit here and you drink some water and you wait for the sun to come up, and tomorrow at 11 o'clock you find out what your wife is going to say in front of the cameras, and then you decide. Decide what? Whether to fight. Of course I'm going to... Julian. Diego stood up. He put on his coat. He was a small, tired, bald man in a coat that was slightly too big for him, and for just a moment, standing there in the lamplight, he looked like every other man who had ever walked away from a client who had run out of runway. Julian, listen to me. I am your lawyer. I am going to do my job. I am going to be in that building at 11. I am going to watch your wife read her statement, and then I am going to come back here, and I'm going to sit in this chair again, and I'm going to tell you what I think you should do next. But I'm also a friend. And as a friend, Julian, I am telling you, I am begging you, to sit in this room tonight. Do not call anyone else. Do not post anything. Do not give a statement. Do not go on television. Do not, under any circumstances, threaten her. Do you hear me? Diego? Do you hear me, Julian? Yes. Say it. I hear you. Diego nodded once. He walked to the door. At the door, he paused, and he did something that, in 9 years, he had also never done. He turned around. Julian. What? I want you to think tonight about every deal you have closed in the last 11 years. I want you to think about who brought it to you. I want you to think about the lunches she went to, the weekends she spent at other people's houses, the phone calls she made that you didn't listen to. I want you to think about how exactly you got rich. And I want you to be honest with yourself, just once, just tonight in this room where nobody else can hear. Can you do that for me? Julian did not answer. Diego watched him for another second. Then Diego turned and walked out of the penthouse, and the door closed behind him, and the lock engaged with a small, expensive, final click. The shower was still running. Julian Voss sat on the edge of his bed in the penthouse on Calle Velázquez, under a ceiling he owned, in a city he had thought he understood, and for the first time since he had been 24 years old and had watched three men carry his father's furniture down a staircase in Bilbao, Julian Voss began, quietly, to be afraid. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky over Madrid was beginning, very faintly, to go gray. Somewhere across the city, in a house on Calle Almagro, where a lamp had been burning for 36 years, Valeria Draven was sitting at a small writing desk in the blue room, reading a single page of paper in her father's handwriting, moving her lips as she read, learning the exact shape of the words she would speak at 11 o'clock into a line of microphones in a room she had never before been allowed to enter on her own name. She read the statement 3 times. She changed one word. Then she set the paper down, and she closed her eyes. And she sat for a long moment in the quiet of the house where she had been born, and she began, for the first time in 11 years, to remember who she was. She slept for 2 hours and 11 minutes. She knew the exact number because she had looked at the clock when she lay down, 4:38 a.m. And she looked at it again when she opened her eyes, 6:49 a.m. And the arithmetic of those two numbers was the kind of arithmetic her father had taught her to do automatically, without thinking, the way other people breathed. She got out of bed. She did not feel tired. She would pay for this later, she knew, somewhere around 3 in the afternoon, in the form of a headache that would sit behind her right eye and that would not respond to aspirin. But she would not pay for it now. Now, she had work to do. Gloria had laid out 3 possible outfits on the long bench at the foot of the bed. Valeria walked past the first 2 without looking at them. The third was a dark navy suit. Not black, her father had been specific about that. Black reads like grief, mija, and we are not in grief today. We are in business. With a cream silk blouse and no jewelry except her mother's pearl studs. Valeria put it on without thinking. She had worn some version of this outfit, in her head, 1,000 times in the last 8 hours. In the mirror, she looked 36 years old and like a woman who had slept for 9 hours. The face she had learned to wear for rooms was already on, and she had not consciously put it on. And this, she understood, was the first thing her father had given her, the ability to put on the face without noticing the putting on. Her mother had called it the máscara del apellido, the mask of the last name. Her mother had worn it too, every day of her adult life, and had only taken it off. Valeria understood now, in the last 3 weeks before she died. She went downstairs. The blue room had been cleared. The dining room had been set for 1. There was black coffee, no milk, and 1 piece of toast, which she did not touch. She drank the coffee. She read the statement 1 more time. She did not change anything else. At 9:04 a.m., Mateo appeared in the doorway. "Señora, your father is waiting in the car." "My father is coming." "To Calle Serrano." "Yes, señora." "He wasn't supposed to, but he said to tell you that he is not coming inside. He is coming to the sidewalk. He said you would understand." She understood. It was the oldest thing her father did. He would not stand in the frame of the photograph. He had not, in 50 years of public life, allowed a single photograph of himself to be published in a Spanish newspaper. There existed perhaps 6 clear images of Augusto Draven in the world, and every one of them was the wrong angle or the wrong light. But he would stand on the sidewalk across the street where nobody would know to look for him, and he would watch his daughter walk into a building. He had done this on her first day of university. He had done it on the morning of her wedding, standing in the shadow of a bakery across the plaza from the church, because he had given her away inside and then had slipped out to watch her arrive 1 more time. He would do it today. She put the statement into the inside pocket of her jacket. She walked out of the house. The morning was cold and pale and smelled faintly of rain that had stopped. The Mercedes moved through Madrid the way a Mercedes always moved through Madrid, which was to say that nothing ever seemed to be in its way. Her father was in the back seat. He was reading a newspaper. He looked up only when she closed the door. "Mija, Papa, you slept. A little. That is enough." He folded the newspaper. He set it between them on the leather seat. The front page was about Julian. Of course it was. The headline was in the careful, neutral, deadly Spanish of a paper that knew exactly what kind of story it was printing. Voss desata escándalo en Gala de Aurora. Voss unleashes scandal at Aurora Gala. Below it, a photograph, not of the kiss, but of the moment after. Julian on the stage with the microphone, his face already beginning to flatten into the expression of a man who has understood, too late, the dimensions of his own mistake. Valeria looked at the photograph. She felt nothing. This, too, was her father's work. Not the feeling nothing. She had come to the feeling nothing on her own, in the back of this same car 8 hours ago. But the instinct to check for it, the instinct to notice that she felt nothing and to be satisfied by it. "You will know you are ready, mija," her father had told her once, when she was 19 and had come home from Paris and had told him about a man who had written her bad letters, when his name on a page is the same to you as any other word. The word Voss on the page was now the same to her as any other word. She was ready. "The press conference," her father said. "Yes." 112 cameras. "I checked." 112. "Accredited. Probably another 30 or 40 without accreditation. The street will be closed." "You closed the street." "The city closed the street. At my suggestion." She did not ask who he had suggested it to. "Papa." "I want to say something more than what's written." He looked at her. He was a man whose face did not move much, but there was, for a half-second, a small flicker in the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, a consideration. "More. Not longer. More. Tell me." "I want to mention him, by name, once." "The statement does not—" "I know what the statement does. I wrote a word in the margin last night. One word. I want to say it." "Which word?" "Dignidad." Her father was quiet for a moment. He was looking past her, out the window, at the passing morning streets of the Salamanca district. A woman was walking a very small dog. A man in a butcher's apron was raising a metal grate. A child was eating a croissant on a bench. "Dignidad," he said slowly, "spoken by you, about him." "Yes." "Explain to me why." "Because I do not want the story, a year from now, to be the husband who cheated and the wife who left. I want the story to be the husband who could not recognize dignity when he was married to it. I want that word in the record. I want it in his obituary, Papa, if he lives long enough to have one." Her father looked at her for a long time. Then he did something rare. He reached across the seat and he took her hand, not gently, not sentimentally, but firmly, the way a man takes a tool he has been looking for in a drawer, and he held it briefly and he let it go. "Say the word, mija." "All right. But only once. Once. And do not look at the cameras when you say it. Look past them. There is a point on the back wall of any press room, a clock, usually, or a crest. And you will look at that. Do you understand me? You will speak the word into the room, not into the lens." "Yes, Papa." "Good." The car turned onto Calle Serrano. The street had been closed at both ends. Police barricades, uniformed officers, a crowd, already, behind the barricades. The paparazzi knots, the wire service photographers, the Spanish television vans with their satellite dishes still folded down, the handful of ordinary people who had read the news over breakfast and had come to see what they would be able to tell their coworkers about on Monday. Valeria saw from 2 blocks away the scale of it. She had not been photographed this much since her wedding. She had not expected the comparison to come to her so cleanly, but it did, and she noted it, and she set it down. The Mercedes stopped at the corner of Serrano and Hermosilla. Her father got out first, without a word, without a goodbye, without anything that could be misread by a lens, and he crossed the street at an ordinary pace and disappeared into the doorway of a small tobacconist that had been there, under 3 different names, since the early 1940s. From that doorway, Valeria knew, he would watch her walk into the Voss building. He would see her come out. He would not be photographed doing either. She took a breath. Matteo opened her door. "Senora." "Matteo." "Your father said to tell you one more thing." "Tell me." "He said, 'Dignidad is a word that carries its own weight, mija. Do not underline it. Let the microphone carry it.'" Valeria smiled. A small, private smile, not for any camera. "Tell him I heard him." She got out of the car. The lobby of Voss Holdings on Calle Serrano was 41 meters of polished black granite, the floors glossy enough that they reflected people upside down when they walked across them. The logo on the wall behind the reception desk was large and brushed silver and read simply Voss. A marble bench along the left wall. A single sculpture, a Chilita original, that Julian had bought in a flush of self-regard in 2017, and that he had, she knew for a fact, never once looked at. There were 14 security guards in the lobby. Valeria counted them as she walked, 12 more than usual. 2 in plain suits at the reception desk who did not work for Voss Holdings. She could tell by the way they stood, which was the way her father's men stood. The shoulders slightly forward, the weight on the balls of the feet. 2 more by the elevators, same posture. Her father's, all of them. He had sent them last night, probably around 3 in the morning, and by the time the building's actual security had come on shift at 6, her father's men had been inside for hours and had, she suspected, had some kind of quiet conversation with Voss Holdings' own head of security. A conversation that had ended with the Voss security team standing exactly where they were told to stand and not asking questions. The elevators took her to the 14th floor. The press room was not actually a press room. It was Julian's largest conference room, with the long walnut table pushed against one wall and 60 folding chairs set up in rows and a low riser at the far end with a lectern and a row of microphones. The Voss logo was on the wall behind the lectern, large, brushed silver. Exactly where her father had wanted it. The room was already full. It had gone quiet when she walked in. Not all at once, in a small wave from the door inward, the way a pond goes still when a heron lands at its edge. Cameras lifted, phones came up. She did not look at them. She walked to the lectern. She placed her folded piece of paper on the wood. She did not unfold it yet. She looked at the back wall of the room. There was a clock. Her father had been right. There was always a clock. The clock read 10:59. She waited. At 11 o'clock exactly, the second hand clicked onto the hour, and Valeria Draven unfolded the piece of paper. "Good morning." Her voice was quieter than anyone in the room had expected. The sound technicians all over the room ducked forward, adjusting levels. She let them. She did not repeat the greeting. "My name is Valeria Draven. I will not be answering questions today. I will read a short statement, and then I will leave this building. I ask that you respect both of those choices." 112 cameras, and none of them made a sound. The 60 journalists in the folding chairs might as well have been furniture. She had them. She had not had to try to have them. They had been hers from the moment she walked through the door, because the door had been hers, because the building had been hers, because, though they did not know this, though they would never know this, the very light in the room, the way the morning fell through the windows at her back, had been chosen, 8 hours ago, by a man in a dark gray suit standing in the tobacconist's doorway across the street. "At 9 o'clock this morning," she said, "my attorney filed a petition for the dissolution of my marriage to Julian Voss. The grounds are incompatibility. There will be no further public comment on the legal process. My attorney is Rafael Santarén of Santarén y Llorente, and any procedural questions should be directed to his office." A rustle. A small one. She let it pass. "Effective immediately, I am stepping down from all advisory and informal positions I have held within Voss Holdings and its subsidiaries over the past 11 years. I have provided a full list of these positions to the board of Voss Holdings this morning, and I will not be discussing them publicly." The word board sat in the room for a second. She watched it land. She had wanted it to land. There was no board, in the real sense. Julian had treated Voss Holdings as a private kingdom for years, and there were 2 people in this room, maybe 3, who knew that. Those 2 or 3 were now writing, very quickly, in their notebooks. "I want to say 2 more things." She lifted her eyes from the paper. She did not look at the cameras. She looked at the clock. "The first is to the employees of Voss Holdings. I know that many of you learned last night for the first time that I had any role in this company at all. That is because I never wanted credit for that role. I wanted the company to succeed. It did succeed. You made it succeed. The work you did was real, and it was yours, and nothing that has happened or will happen in the coming weeks takes that away from you. I am grateful to every one of you. I will not forget your names." A breath in the room. Somebody, a woman, in the 3rd row, probably a Voss employee who had come to watch, made a small sound and covered her mouth. "The second thing." Valeria paused. She felt, for just a second, the small cold shape of the walnut her husband had felt at 3 a.m. in a penthouse he did not yet know he was about to lose. Then she let it go. The second thing is about dignity. She said the word once. She did not underline it. The microphone carried it, as her father had told her it would. I was married for 11 years to a man who, last night, believed he was teaching me a lesson. He was not. He was teaching himself one. There are many things a husband can take from a wife. Her time, her work, her name, sometimes, if she allows it. But there is one thing he cannot take, because it was never given to him in the first place. A person's dignity does not belong to the person who tries to damage it. It belongs to the person who refuses to hand it over. She stopped. She folded the paper. Thank you for your time. She stepped back from the lectern. She turned and she walked, without hurry, without glancing sideways, without acknowledging the wall of flashes that had begun again the second her hand left the paper, toward the side door of the conference room. The side door was held open by one of her father's men. She walked through it. The door closed. She did not hear the sound the room made after she left, because she was already moving down the hallway, and the hallway was already moving away from her, and by 11:04 a.m. she was back in the lobby, crossing the black granite, and by 11:05 she was in the Mercedes, and by 11:06 the car was moving, and her father was in the tobacconist's doorway, and he had watched her come out, and he had already turned and was walking, slowly, east on Hermosilla toward the next thing. The next thing for Augusto Draven was a phone call. The phone call was to a man in Genoa. The man in Genoa controlled, among other things, the insurance on certain container movements in the Western Mediterranean. By 11:42 a.m., 40 minutes after Valeria Draven had walked out of the Voss building on Calle Serrano, 2 additional shipments belonging to a Voss holding subsidiary had been reclassified, on paper, from standard to under review. Neither of those reclassifications would appear in any newspaper for 4 days. By then, it would not matter. Julian Voss watched the press conference on a television. He watched it from the penthouse on Calle Velázquez, where he had not slept, where he had not eaten, where the shower the girl had taken at 3 a.m. was the last sound he remembered hearing before the sun came up. The girl was gone. She had left silently around 7, carrying a small overnight bag and wearing the same white dress from the gala underneath a coat she had borrowed from Valeria's closet without asking. She had not said goodbye. He had not asked her to. He watched the press conference on the enormous television in the living room, with the sound turned all the way up because his ears felt, for some reason, as if they were packed with cotton. He watched his wife walk into a room he had built. He watched her stand in front of a logo he had paid for. He watched her speak in a voice he had not, he realized, heard her actually use in years. Not the voice she used with him, not the voice she used at dinner parties, not the voice she used on the phone with her father. A fourth voice. A voice he had never been allowed near, and he understood, listening to it, that this was the voice that had always been underneath the others. This was the voice she used when she was by herself. She said the word dignity. She said it once. Julian felt his eyes burn. He had not cried since he was 27. He was not going to cry now. But something hot moved behind his eyes, and he sat very still on the long white sofa in the penthouse he owned. And he watched his wife finish her statement, and he watched her walk out of his conference room. And he watched the Spanish television anchor cut away to a panel of commentators who were already, at 11:06 in the morning, beginning to use the past tense about him. Voss era conocido por. El señor Voss había construido, durante los últimos años, su reputación había sido, había. Era. Durante. He muted the television. He sat for a long time in the silence of the penthouse, on the sofa, with the muted television showing, now, a slow-motion replay of his wife saying the word dignidad, and he did something he had not done in a very long time. He thought about his father. His father had been a small man, a quiet man, unimpressive, a man who had worked 31 years for the same shipping company in Bilbao and had been laid off at 57, and who had not survived the laying off well. Julian had been 24. His father had lost the apartment. His father had come, for 3 months, to sleep on the fold-out bed in the living room of Julian's small rented flat. His father had, in that living room, begun to be afraid of things. Small things, at first, The mail, the telephone, the sound of the upstairs neighbor's dog. And by the end of that third month, Julian had come home from work one evening to find his father sitting at the kitchen table with a paper napkin folded very precisely in front of him. And his father had said, "Julianito, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I did not mean to be a problem to you." And Julian had understood, in that moment, that he never wanted to be a man who apologized like that to anybody ever in his life. He had built his whole life to not be that man. He had succeeded. He had succeeded so thoroughly that he had, at some point in the last 11 years, forgotten that the thing he had been running from was not poverty. It was the shape of a man who had been reduced. It was the paper napkin folded precisely on the kitchen table. On the muted television, his wife disappeared through a side door. Julian looked at the phone on the coffee table. He did not pick it up. Instead, he did something strange, something that later, much later, he would not be able to explain to the therapist his second lawyer would insist he see. He got up off the sofa. He walked across the penthouse, through the long, pale corridor, into the room Valeria had used as her own. It was a small room by the standards of the penthouse. She had chosen the smallest of the spare bedrooms on purpose, had turned it into her dressing room and her reading room and her private office, and he had mocked her gently 11 years ago for choosing the smallest room in a 1,200 square meter penthouse. And she had said, "Julian, I like rooms where I can touch both walls at once. It reminds me that I am the biggest thing in them." He had not thought about that sentence since she had said it. He thought about it now. The room smelled like her. Not perfume. Valeria had never worn perfume. She had had allergies since she was 12. But something else. Something faint and specific. The particular smell of a person's clothes and books and skin over a long time. On the small writing desk was a stack of her papers. On the wall above the desk was the Goya drawing. It was a small sketch, a woman's face in three-quarter profile, and he had always called it creepy. And he had always meant it as a joke. And he understood now that his wife had not taken it as a joke. He sat down at the desk. The top paper on the stack was a handwritten list. Her handwriting, 7 lines. He read it. It was a list of names, 7 men. He recognized 3 of them. One of them was him. He stared at the list for a long time. He did not know what it was. He would not know what it was for another 4 days when his second lawyer, not Diego, a new one, because Diego would resign by the end of Sunday, would come to him with photocopies of certain documents and would, in a careful voice, explain to him that his wife had been keeping, for several years, a list of men she considered to have failed her, and that his name had been on that list since sometime in 2021. But in the moment, in the penthouse, in her small room, Julian did not know what the list meant. He only knew that his name was on it, and that there were 3 names above his, and that he did not recognize those 3 names, and that he understood, with the dull, horrible clarity of a man who has finally started to understand the scale of what he does not know, that the life he had been living for the last 11 years had been a stage set, and that the stage set had been dressed by his wife, and that he had never once in 11 years walked backstage to see what was holding it up. He got up. He walked to the window of her small room. He looked down at Calle Velasquez. The taxi was still at the corner. The same taxi. Its roof light was still off. Its engine was still running. Julian Voss stood at the window of the room that had belonged to his wife, and he looked down at the taxi that had been watching his building for 11 hours, and he understood finally, with a completeness that made his knees almost buckle, that the taxi was not going to move until somebody told it to move, and that the person who would tell it to move was not him. The walnut in his chest was a stone now. The stone was colder than the walnut had been. The stone was not going to go away. At 11:53 a.m., the phone in the penthouse rang. Not Julian's mobile. The landline. The landline almost never rang. Julian had forgotten for a second what the sound was. It was an old phone, a real one, with a real bell inside it, and the bell rang once and then stopped and then rang again, and Julian walked from the window of Valeria's room back through the corridor into the living room, and he stood for a long moment in front of the phone before he picked it up. "Hello, Senor Voss?" The voice was a man's voice, older, calm, unhurried. A voice that carried, in the vowels, the faint flat trace of Asturias, although the man had clearly not lived in Asturias in a very long time. Julian had never heard this voice before in his life. He knew instantly whose voice it was. Yes. Senor Voss, my name is not important. I'm calling on behalf of Augusto Draven. You may assume, for the purposes of this conversation, that I am him, although I am not. Do you understand the distinction? Yes. Good. I will be brief. Senor Draven does not wish to speak to you today. He may wish to speak to you in the future. That is not yet decided. What is decided, Senor Voss, is the following. At 2 o'clock this afternoon, a car will be sent to the Calle Velázquez building. The car will take you to a notary's office on Paseo de la Castellana. At the notary's office, you will sign a document. The document is being drafted at this moment. It is a voluntary resignation from all executive positions you currently hold within Voss Holdings and its subsidiaries. You will sign it. It will be notarized. You will return home. Julian closed his eyes. And if I don't sign it? There was a small pause on the line. It was not a threatening pause. It was a pause of the kind a patient adult makes when a child has asked a question that the adult had hoped the child would not ask because the answer is going to be more complicated than the child is ready for. Senor Voss? Yes, you will sign it. I do not say this to frighten you. I say it because it is a fact about the next 6 hours of your life. I am telling you the fact in advance because Senor Draven believes that a man should be allowed to know what he is walking into, even when he is walking into it on his own feet. This is a courtesy. Do you understand it is a courtesy? Yes. Good. At 2 o'clock, Senor Voss, the car is black. The driver will not speak to you. Do not bring a lawyer. If you bring a lawyer, the car will turn around at the corner of Castellana and Ortega y Gasset, and it will return you to your building, and we will try again tomorrow, under less favorable conditions. Less favorable. Less favorable. Yes. What does that mean? It means, Senor Voss, that the document you will sign tomorrow will contain 2 additional clauses which the document today does not contain. I will leave it to your imagination to guess what those clauses might concern. You have, I am told, a vivid imagination. Good afternoon, Senor Voss. Wait. Good afternoon. The line went dead. Julian stood in the middle of his living room with the receiver in his hand, and on the muted television, the Spanish news had moved on, already, to a story about a storm that was forming somewhere over the Bay of Biscay. He set the receiver down. He sat on the sofa. He did not move again until 1:45, when he got up and washed his face in a bathroom that had been decorated by his wife and put on a jacket that had been chosen for him by his wife, and went down in the elevator to the lobby of the building he owned and walked out onto the Calle Velázquez where a black car was waiting at the curb. The taxi at the corner was gone. It had gone the moment the black car arrived, because its job, for 11 hours, had been to be there until the black car did not need it to be there anymore. Julian understood this as he walked toward the black car, with the specific slow understanding of a man who has finally learned to read a sentence in a language he did not know he had been living inside. The driver of the black car did not look at him. Julian got in. The door closed. The car pulled away from the curb, and Calle Velázquez, which had been Julian Voss's street for 9 years, closed behind him as if it had never known his name. The car turned onto the Paseo de la Castellana at 2:09 p.m., and Julian Voss realized, somewhere between the traffic light at Núñez de Balboa and the second roundabout, that he had lost the ability to keep track of how much time was passing. This had never happened to him before. Julian was a man who, on a normal day, could tell you to within 90 seconds how long any given meeting had lasted, how long any given flight had been delayed, how long a courier had kept him waiting in any given lobby. His sense of time was the first weapon he had developed when he was 26 years old and trying to learn how rich people sat in rooms. Rich people, he had noticed, never looked at their watches. They always knew what time it was anyway. Today, in the back of the black car, he looked at his watch 4 times in 6 minutes, and each time he did, the numbers on the dial told him something different, and none of it stuck. The numbers would arrive in his brain and then slide off, the way rain slides off a closed window. The driver did not speak. The driver was not young, 50s maybe. A clean-shaven man with a neck that had thickened from decades of a certain kind of labor, and hands on the wheel that were steady in a way that could not be taught. He drove well. He drove at exactly the speed limit, not 1 kilometer over, not 1 under, and he changed lanes only when he had to, and every time he did, Julian felt the car adjust around him the way a body adjusts in sleep. Julian had owned 4 Maybachs and 2 Bentleys and had employed a rotation of 3 drivers, and none of them had ever driven like this. His drivers had driven like men performing a service. This man drove like a man moving a package. The package was Julian. The thought landed with such specific clarity that Julian actually laughed, once, short and surprised, and the driver's eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror for a half-second and flicked back down and did not acknowledge him. That was the only moment, the entire drive, that the driver's eyes moved at all. Julian looked out the window. They had turned. He had not noticed them turning. They were on a side street now, a narrow one-way street he did not recognize, lined with stone buildings from the 1930s that had heavy iron doors and small brass plates next to the doorbells. Old Madrid, real Madrid, the kind of street where a lawyer's practice had been in the same second-floor flat for 60 years, where a notary's office was not a business but a quiet arrangement between families, where doormen recognized you, or they did not, and there was no middle ground. The car stopped in front of a building with a green door. The driver did not open it for him. Julian sat for a moment, waiting, because he had been waited on his entire adult life, because the last time he had opened a car door for himself was sometime in 2016, and then he understood, with the slow second-hand understanding of a man in the wrong country, that nobody in this car was going to open anything for him anymore. He opened the door, he got out. The green door of this building opened before he reached it. A woman was standing inside. She was maybe 50. She was not smiling. She was wearing a pale gray cardigan over a cream dress, and she held a clipboard, and she said, without looking at his face, "Senor Voss, follow me, please." He followed her, up 3 flights of worn marble stairs. The building smelled like old paper and cold stone. There was no elevator. Somewhere above them, a dog was barking, and somewhere below a child was practicing scales on an upright piano, and Julian understood that he was walking up a staircase in a building that did not know his name, in a city that had suddenly stopped knowing his name, and he felt the stone under his hand as he touched the banister, and the stone was cold in a way that expensive stone never was. On the 3rd floor, a door, wooden, dark, a small brass plate no larger than a playing card, engraved with a name he did not bother to read. The woman opened the door. "Please?" Julian stepped inside. The office was not large. It was one room with tall windows that faced an interior courtyard, so the light was gray and even and came from nowhere in particular. There was a single long table. There were 4 chairs. There was a portrait on the wall of a man in a dark suit from sometime in the 1960s, and a small vase of yellow flowers on a side table, and a pitcher of water with 2 glasses. There were 3 people waiting. The first was the notary. He was perhaps 65, bald, with silver-rimmed glasses, and he stood when Julian entered but did not extend his hand. He gestured instead toward a chair. "Senor Voss, please sit." The second was a woman Julian did not recognize. She was in her 40s, with her hair pulled back into a severe knot, a dark suit, a leather portfolio. She did not stand. She did not look up from whatever she was reading. The third was Rafael Santarén. Julian had never met Rafael Santarén. He had read about him twice in Cinco Dias, years ago, in contexts that had made Julian think, at the time, that is the kind of lawyer I will eventually need. Santarén was a small man, 72, with a head of completely white hair and a face that looked like a carving of a polite accountant. He sat at the far end of the table with his hands folded on top of a thin blue folder, and he watched Julian come in, and his eyes were the color of weak tea, and they did not move. "Senor Santarén? Senor Voss? Please sit, Senor Voss." Julian sat. He sat across from the woman with the leather portfolio and diagonally from Santarén, and the notary took the chair at the head of the table. There was a 4th chair. It stayed empty. Julian looked at it and understood without being told that the empty chair was not going to be filled today, that the empty chair was the chair of a person who had not come because he did not need to come, because the shape of his absence was a more effective presence than his actual body would have been. Augusto Draven's chair. "Senor Voss," the notary said, "I am Don Patricio Elorrieta. I have been a notary public of the Kingdom of Spain for 31 years. I will be witnessing the instruments you are about to sign. I will explain each document to you before you sign it. You may ask any questions you wish. You may decline to sign any document. I'm obliged to tell you that. Do you understand?" "Yes." Good. I have no stake in this transaction. My role is procedural. You understand this? Yes? Good. Don Patricio turned slightly towards Santarén. Counsel, if you would. Santarén opened the thin blue folder. He did not look at Julian. Senor Voss, there are 3 documents on the table this afternoon. The first is your resignation from the position of Chief Executive Officer of Voss Holdings S.A. It is effective immediately upon your signature. It is irrevocable. It contains no severance. It contains no non-compete. It also contains no admission of wrongdoing of any kind, which is, I assure you, a concession. Julian felt the word concession land the way a small pebble lands in deep water. The second document, Santarén said, is your resignation from the boards of 7 wholly owned subsidiaries of Voss Holdings, which are listed in Schedule Ish-A. The same terms apply. The third, Santarén said, is a private undertaking. It is not for the commercial registry. It will not be filed with any public authority. It is held in escrow by Don Patricio, who is bound by his professional duties to keep it confidential unless specific conditions are triggered. Do you understand what I mean by an undertaking, Senor Voss? A contract. A promise. Between me and who? For the first time, Santarén looked up. His eyes were not unkind. That was what was frightening about them. They were the eyes of a man who had seen 90 different versions of Julian Voss across this same table over the course of a 50-year career, and who had stopped, decades ago, being either moved or amused by any of them. Between you, Senor Voss, and a party whose name does not appear on the document, the party will be referred to, in the text, as the interested family. You will know who that is. You will not, today or ever, say it out loud in this room. Do you understand? Yes. Good. Santarén opened the folder further. He slid the first document across the table toward Julian. It was 3 pages. Julian looked at it. The letters were, for a moment, just letters. He read it. It was exactly what Santarén had said it was. A resignation, simple, clean. The language of a man who would not fight. His name was printed at the bottom. There was a line for his signature. He read it again. He looked at Santarén. Can I? No. I didn't ask the question. You were going to ask if you could call your lawyer. The answer is no. You were informed of the conditions of today's meeting. You arrived alone. That is the condition under which this document was prepared. If you leave this room now without signing it, the version that is prepared for you tomorrow morning, in a different building, will look different. Don Patricio, could you confirm? Don Patricio nodded slowly. This is correct. I am not able to witness a document prepared under different terms than the terms under which I was engaged. The document I am witnessing today is the document on this table. And tomorrow, Julian said. Tomorrow, Santarén said, is another day. Julian picked up the pen. The pen was heavier than he had expected. It was an old fountain pen. It had been laid out for him. He did not know in that moment whose pen it was, but he understood, the way he was beginning to understand a lot of things, too late, that everything on this table had been chosen for effect. The fountain pen, the yellow flowers, the portrait of the dead man on the wall, who was probably Don Patricio's father, the previous notary, the man whose chair Don Patricio now sat in. He signed. His signature was not quite his. It was the right letters, in the right order, but the slant was wrong. The pressure was wrong. He looked at it on the page. He did not recognize the hand that had made it. He signed the second document, then the third. The third document, the undertaking, he read more slowly. It was 4 pages. It was, in its essence, a list of things he would never do again. He would never, for any reason, attempt to contact Valeria Draven directly. He would never, in any interview or written work, mention her name. He would never return to the Calle Velázquez penthouse. He would vacate it within 7 days. His personal effects would be removed by a firm engaged by the interested family and delivered to an address of his choosing, which had to be outside the province of Madrid. He would not, for a period of 7 years, accept employment or a board seat at any company headquartered in Spain, Italy, Greece, Portugal, Morocco, Argentina, Chile, or Mexico. He would not for a period of 7 years enter the island of Ibiza. Julian almost laughed at the Ibiza clause. It sat at the bottom of page 3, alone, like a little joke. It was the only detail in the entire afternoon that was clearly personal, that had been written by a human being rather than a lawyer, that was meant to land on him specifically and to wound him specifically and to remind him, in the exact moment he read it, that a woman somewhere had thought about him carefully enough to include it. He thought, looking at it, of the seventh girl. He did not laugh. He signed. Don Patricio stamped the documents. He stamped them with a heavy brass stamp, the kind of stamp that had probably stamped 10,000 documents in the last 100 years in that office, and each stamp made a small hollow thump on the wooden table. Santarém closed the folder. "Thank you, Senor Voss." "Am I done?" "You are done here." Julian stood up. He was unsteady for a half-second, and he put his hand on the back of the chair to keep himself upright, and the woman with the leather portfolio, who had not spoken the entire meeting, who had not even lifted her eyes from her reading, looked up for the first time, and she looked at him, and she did not smile. But there was something in her face, something small and cold and almost academic, that Julian understood was the face of a person watching a man lose his balance in a very specific, very expected way. He walked to the door. At the door he stopped. "Santarém." The lawyer did not answer. He was putting his pen back in its case. "Santarém, can I ask you one thing?" Santarém looked up. "One," he said. "Briefly. Is she—" Julian's voice caught. He did not know, until that moment, that it was going to catch. He had not planned for that. He swallowed, and he tried again. "Is she all right?" The lawyer looked at him for a long time. Something moved across Santarén's face then, something that might have been the ghost of a feeling. Not pity, Santarém did not do pity, but something adjacent. The professional regret of a surgeon who has watched a patient sign a consent form without understanding what consent meant. "Senora Draven," Rafael Santarém said quietly, "is not your concern anymore, Senor Voss." He looked back down at his folder. Julian walked out. The black car was waiting downstairs. The driver still did not speak. The drive back to Calle Velázquez took 19 minutes and covered, by the grace of Madrid's one-way streets, roughly the same neighborhoods the first drive had covered, but in reverse, and Julian understood, slowly, in pieces, the way a man understands a language he is losing, that the driver was taking the long way on purpose. The driver was giving him time. The driver, Julian realized, had done this before. The driver had driven other men from their homes to green doors on narrow streets, to rooms with yellow flowers and portraits of dead notaries, and had driven them home again with the same slow, deliberate 19-minute route. And the route was not an accident. The route was part of the procedure. The route was designed to allow the man in the back seat to begin to understand, in the silence, with no one to perform for, what had just happened to him. Julian looked at his hands. His hands, he noticed, were shaking. Not a lot. Just a low, steady tremor in the fingers. He watched the tremor for a long time. He had not noticed it starting. He did not know when it would stop. It occurred to him, with the slow, dull relevance of something glimpsed underwater, that he was 34 pounds lighter than he had been at 27, that he had not eaten anything since lunchtime the previous day, and that the tremor was possibly, at least partly, just sugar. He had spent 11 years building a body and a life that did not tremble. The tremble was, apparently, still in there, waiting. They reached the Calle Velázquez at 3:41 p.m. The driver did not say goodbye. Julian got out. The door closed. The black car pulled away and merged with the afternoon traffic and vanished around the corner at Goya, and Julian Voss stood on the sidewalk in front of the building he owned and looked up at the penthouse he had 7 days to vacate, and he did not know, in that moment, where to put his feet. A voice behind him said, "Senor Voss." He turned. There were 2 men on the sidewalk. Not her father's men, he didn't think. These were younger, in suits that fit slightly worse, and one of them had a small camera around his neck, and the other was holding a phone with the recording light on. Reporters. Of course. He had forgotten. It had taken them half a day to find his home address, but they had found it because everyone found everything eventually. "Senor Voss, any comment on your wife's statement this morning?" "Senor Voss, we understand you've just come from—" "Senor Voss." Julian kept walking. He did not acknowledge them. He went up the steps of the building. The doorman, a man named Federico, who had opened this door for Julian 1,000 times, who had accepted Christmas envelopes and summer envelopes and specific envelopes for specific favors, held the door for him. And as Julian passed through, Federico did something that Julian had never seen him do. Federico looked down. Federico did not meet his eyes. Julian stopped in the lobby. Federico. Senor Voss? Look at me, Federico. Federico looked at him. Federico's face was a careful blank. Has somebody talked to you today, Federico? A pause. A very small one. And then Federico said, quietly, without performance, the truest sentence that would be spoken to Julian Voss all week. Senor Voss, I am sorry. I have been told. I cannot. I am sorry. Julian nodded. He did not press it. There was no point. Federico's wife had kidney trouble. Julian happened to know this because he had paid 2 years ago for a specialist in Munich. Federico had 3 children. Federico was, by the standards of any building on Calle Velázquez, a fortunate man with a fortunate job, and Federico had been told, that morning, probably, by a phone call from a number he did not recognize, that his fortunate job required him to look at the floor when Julian Voss walked past. Julian understood. He took the elevator up. The penthouse, when he walked into it, was colder than it had been when he left. The afternoon had gone cloudy. No lights were on. The muted television in the living room was still showing the Spanish news, and the Spanish news had moved already from his wife to the storm over the Bay of Biscay, which was apparently going to arrive over Galicia sometime after midnight. Julian walked through the penthouse. He walked the way a man walks through a museum he is about to leave forever. He walked through the living room, through the formal dining room where he had hosted 17 dinners in the last year, each of them for at least 2 billionaires. Through the library, where the books had been chosen by an interior designer and where he had read, at most, 4 of them. Through the master bedroom, where the bed had not been made because Gloria, who was Valeria's housekeeper, who had been Valeria's housekeeper since before the marriage, who had never, it was now clear, been his housekeeper at all, had not come that morning and would not be coming again. He ended, without deciding to, in Valeria's small room. The Goya sketch was still on the wall. The stack of papers was still on the desk. The list of 7 names was still on top of the stack. He sat down at the desk. He looked at the list again. His name was the 4th. He thought now about the 3 above his. He did not recognize them. They were ordinary Spanish names, unremarkable. A Jose Maria, a Fernando, a Rodrigo. 3 men who were not billionaires, who had not been in any newspaper Julian had ever read, whose names were written in his wife's small, neat hand in black ink on a piece of unlined, cream-colored paper. 3 men who had, apparently, failed Valeria Draven before him. He sat with the list for a long time. Then, because he was 44 years old, and because he had nothing else to do, because his phone was in his pocket, and there was nobody to call, because the woman who had been his wife was not in this penthouse, and was never going to be in this penthouse again, Julian Voss did something he had not done in 30 years. He put his face in his hands, and he cried. He cried badly, the way men cry when they have not cried in a long time. The sounds were ugly. His shoulders shook. He did not cry for her. He understood, even as he cried, that he had not yet earned the right to cry for her. He cried for himself. He cried for the young man in the Bilbao apartment whose father had folded a napkin on a kitchen table. He cried for the man he had been at 30, who had walked into a benefit dinner in Barcelona and had seen a woman 3 seats away and had made a joke about soup. He cried for the 11 years he had spent, apparently, walking past every door she had opened for him without even seeing the doors. He cried for the Goya on the wall, which he had called creepy because he understood finally why she had hung it in the smallest room in the penthouse. It was so she could look at it alone. Maud. Across the city, in a small parlor on the ground floor of the Calle Almagro house, Valeria Draven was drinking a cup of tea. She had changed out of the navy suit. She had put on gray trousers and a cream sweater and a pair of leather flats that her mother had left her, and she had pinned her hair back with the same clip she had used as a teenager, a small tortoiseshell thing she had owned since she was 15. She had washed her face. She had eaten an actual meal, a plate of lentils and chorizo that Gloria had brought her without asking, because Gloria knew what Valeria ate when Valeria had stopped being able to think about eating. The tea was Earl Grey. She had ordered a pot. She was halfway through the second cup. Her father was in the room. He was not drinking tea. He was standing by the window with his hands behind his back, watching the courtyard, where a cat had appeared on the far wall and was methodically cleaning itself. Papa. He signed. Santarén called. All three. All three, yes. And the undertaking. He signed that too, without protest. Santarén says he read it carefully. He understood what he was signing. She was quiet for a moment. She set down her teacup. Papa, did you mean the Ibiza clause to be, was that from you, or? Augusto Draven smiled. It was the smallest smile she had seen on him in years. A flicker. A thing at the corner of his mouth that appeared and was gone in under a second. No, mija. That was me. That was you. You wrote it in the margin of the draft at 11 o'clock last night. You went back into the study while I was on the phone. I watched you do it. I did not say anything. I didn't know I did that. You did it? She looked into the bottom of her teacup. Papa. Yes. I feel small today. Her father turned from the window. He looked at her. He crossed the parlor slowly, and he sat in the chair across from her, and for the first time in years, maybe since she was 7, maybe since she was 11, certainly not since her wedding day, he sat in a chair across from her in the way a father sits across from a child, not in the way a patriarch sits across from a daughter he has trained. Tell me. Tell me, mija. I don't feel triumphant. I thought I would feel, I don't know, something other than this. What do you feel? Tired. Yes. And sad. Not for him. For the years. For her. For the 25-year-old who laughed at the soup joke. Her father nodded slowly. That is right, mija. Is it? Yes, it is right. If you felt triumphant today, I would be worried about you. Triumph, mija, is what small men feel. A Draven does not feel triumph. A Draven feels finished. And then, after a while, a Draven feels ready. Triumph is between. It is the feeling of people who needed other people's pain to feel okay about themselves. We are not those people. You are not that person. Do you understand me? Yes. What you are feeling today is the correct feeling. It is the feeling a grown woman feels on the day she closes a long, bad chapter. It is grief. Not for the man, for the years. Yes. The grief will not last long, but it is honest. Do not be ashamed of it. She nodded. She did not cry. She had not cried at all since the gala, since the microphone, and she understood, sitting in the parlor with her father across from her, that she was not going to cry about Julian Voss. She had cried about him already, many times over the 11 years, in private, in bathrooms, in cars, in the small hours of mornings when he had not come home, and she had used up, apparently, her whole allotment of tears for him. She had spent them while he was still her husband. There were none left for the ex-husband. Papa. Yes. The 3 names above his. Her father went very still. Mija. The 3 names on the list in my room. The list he probably saw today. You are sure he saw it. It was on top of the stack on my desk. He would have sat down at the desk. He would have seen it. Papa. Yes, mija. Why did you let me leave the list on the desk? Augusto Draven did not answer immediately. He looked at his daughter for a long moment. His eyes were tired. He was 68 years old. He had, in the last 19 hours, made 37 phone calls, had dismantled a man's business empire in 4 countries, had arranged the private resignation of a CEO, and had slept, total, 90 minutes in the chair in his study with his tie still on. He was allowed to be tired. He had earned tired. Mija, tell me, Papa. I let you leave the list on the desk because you wanted to leave the list on the desk. You did not leave it on the desk by accident. You do not do things by accident. You left it there because underneath the part of you that was sleeping for 2 hours, another part of you, a part of you that you have not yet introduced yourself to, wanted Julian Voss to sit at that desk this afternoon and to see that list. Why did I want that? Ask yourself, mija, not me. She was quiet. She drank the rest of her tea. It had gone cold. I wanted him to know, she said, finally, that he was not the first man I was disappointed in. Yes. I wanted him to know that he was the fourth. Yes. I wanted him to know that the list is not about him, that he was not, even in his betrayal, a special event in my life. He was just the fourth name. He was an entry. Yes, mija. Is that cruel, Papa? Her father considered the question with the seriousness with which he considered all serious questions, which was to say he did not answer it for a long time. Cruel, he said at last, is a word you use for a person who takes pleasure in damage. You did not take pleasure, mija. You used a tool. You used it precisely. You used it once. A surgeon who cuts a patient is not cruel, even when the patient bleeds. He is doing his work. Today, you did your work. If you had written the list this week, in anger, to leave it on the desk for him, that would have been cruel. But the list is 6 years old, mija. You wrote the first 3 names before you even suspected him. You added his name 4 years ago on a Tuesday in January with a pencil you had borrowed from my study. Do you remember that? She remembered. It was the Tuesday after the Ibiza weekend. She had taken the pencil from the tray on his desk because her own pen had run out. She had written the name. She had told no one. She had put the list back in the drawer of her dressing room, and she had not looked at it for 16 months. And then she had looked at it again, and she had not crossed the name off. And she had put it back in the drawer. And then again. And again. Yes, you have known for 4 years, mija. Today he learned. Today you let him learn. That is not cruelty. That is the closing of a long, fair account. She nodded. She did not speak for a long moment. Then she said quietly, Papa, I want to leave Madrid for a while. He looked at her. Where? I don't know. The house in Cadiz, maybe, for a month. Take Gloria. Yes. Take Mateo. Yes. When? Tomorrow. Good. I think that is good. Papa. Yes. I don't want to see him again. Ever. Not in a courtroom. Not on a sidewalk. Not in a grocery store in 11 years. Not ever. Her father nodded slowly. You will not, mija. I promise you. I have already arranged it. He will not come back to this city, not in any way that places him in a room you are also in. You have my word. Thank you, Papa. He stood up. He came around the small table. He put his hand on the top of her head, the way he had done when she was 4 and 7 and 12. The same hand, the same weight. And he left it there for a moment. Then he walked out of the parlor. Valeria sat alone with the cold tea in the gray afternoon light. Somewhere outside, the cat had finished cleaning itself and was gone. The courtyard was empty. The house was quiet. Somewhere across the city, a man she had been married to for 11 years was sitting at her small writing desk, with her list in front of him, and she did not feel triumphant, and she did not feel sad, and she did not feel any longer afraid of anything that could happen next. She felt, for the first time in 11 years, that she was in the correct room. That night, at 9:17 p.m., the phone rang in the Calle Almagro house. Gloria answered it. She came into the parlor 2 minutes later and stood in the doorway, and she waited for Valeria to look up from her book. And she said, in the voice Gloria used when she was delivering news she did not know what to do with, Señora, Gloria, it is about the girl. What girl? The girl from the gala, the actress. Valeria set the book down. What about her? She has gone to the newspapers. Which newspapers? Hola. Lecturas, 2 foreign ones. She is giving interviews, señora. She is saying things. What kind of things? Gloria hesitated. She is saying that she was not the only one, señora. She is saying there were others. She is saying she knows names. Valeria was quiet for a moment. Then she did something that surprised her. She laughed. It was a short laugh, not a cruel one, a tired one. The laugh of a person recognizing the specific shape of something they had half expected without knowing they had expected it. Is there a reporter on the phone now? No, señora, it is your father. He is on the line. He is asking whether you wish to speak or whether he should put him through. Yes, señora. Valeria picked up the receiver. Papa. Mija. The girl. Yes. Is this a problem? Her father was quiet for a moment. In the background, very faintly, she could hear the scratch of his pen. No, mija. No? No. The girl is a gift. A gift. Yes. Explain. Mija. The girl is doing, of her own free will, in public, with her own name, what we would otherwise have had to spend 6 months arranging quietly. She is naming names. She is naming dates. She is naming hotels. She is putting into the newspapers, for free, a thing that I would have had to put there myself, carefully, through intermediaries, at a cost. Instead, she is doing it. She is doing it because she is angry, because she is 26, because she believed him, because he has also abandoned her this afternoon. He has? He cut her loose at noon, through a press agent, a short statement. He said the relationship, quote, did not reflect his values. I am using his words. She has apparently taken this personally. Valeria closed her eyes. She almost felt sorry for the girl. Almost. How many names? She has given 3 so far. She claims to have 7. 7. Yes. Papa, that's... Mija, listen to me. This is not our work now. This is her work. We do not touch it. We do not help her. We do not hinder her. We do not speak. We are not in this story anymore. The story has moved past us. Your statement this morning was the end of our story. What happens now is between Julian and the girl apparently has a great deal more to say than he anticipated. All right. Go to Cadiz tomorrow, mija. Yes, Papa. Sleep tonight. Yes, Papa. I love you. I love you, Papa. She set the receiver down. She sat for a long time in the parlor, in the dim lamplight, with her book open on her lap, not reading it. She was thinking about the girl. She was thinking about the list. She was thinking about how the world sometimes arranged itself without your needing to push it. How a thing you had once dreamed about, in private, in anger, in the worst hours of a bad marriage, a thing you had thought only existed as a fantasy, the fantasy of every betrayed wife since the invention of marriage, which was that the other woman would one day turn on the man. Sometimes the world just handed it to you, casually, as a small side gift, while you were busy doing the real work. She did not smile, but something in her shoulders, some small knot that had been tightening since the microphone, loosened a little. She closed the book. She went upstairs to pack for Cadiz. Outside, the storm that the Spanish news had been tracking over the Bay of Biscay had arrived, earlier than forecast, and the first rain of it was falling on the roof of the Calle Almagro house, loud and steady, the sound of a city being washed, and somewhere across that city, in a penthouse on the Calle Velázquez, a man was sitting alone at a small writing desk, with his face in his hands, and the 7 days he had been given were already beginning to count down. The train to Cadiz left Madrid at 8:10 in the morning, and Valeria Draven was on it. She had taken a private compartment in the front car. Mateo was 2 compartments behind her. Gloria was across the aisle, knitting something pale yellow, the way Gloria always knitted on trains. Not because she was making anything in particular, but because Gloria, who had been born in a village in León in 1964, did not know how to sit still on a moving object without something in her hands. Valeria had tried, over the years, to teach her. It had never worked. Gloria's piece and her hands had been welded together sometime in childhood, and there was no undoing it. The train moved south. Valeria watched Spain go past the window. She had taken this line, the AVE to Sevilla, and then the slower local on to Cadiz, maybe 40 times in her life. But she had not taken it in 6 years, because 6 years was roughly how long it had been since she had last gone to Cadiz without Julian. The country looked the same. The bright stubbled fields, the low white villages, the olive groves at the bottoms of the valleys. Spain did not change for anyone's marriage. She had brought 3 books. She opened none of them. She thought instead about the parts of the green folder she had not yet read. Her father had said 2 nights ago in the study, "There are 3 pages at the end that will not help you sleep," and she had closed the folder and had not opened it since. But the 3 pages were still in the folder, and the folder was still on her father's desk, and Valeria had come to understand somewhere between Madrid and Aranjuez that she was going to have to read those 3 pages eventually, and that eventually would probably be the first week of November, after Cadiz, after the quiet, after the storm broke. She was not ready yet. She knew herself well enough to know that, But she was, for the first time, able to see the day when she would be ready, and that was something. Somewhere around Ciudad Real, she fell asleep. The house in Cadiz was older than the country that owned it. It had been built sometime in the 1690s, on a narrow curve of Stone Street 3 blocks up from the Atlantic, by a widow whose name the city had forgotten. Valeria's family had acquired it in 1871 through a chain of paperwork involving a bankruptcy and a second cousin and a favor owed, and had held it ever since. It was not a large house. 3 floors, a small interior courtyard with a lemon tree that had been planted in the 1920s, blue tiles along the stairs, cool in summer, cold in winter, because the widow who had built it had not believed in insulation, and nobody since had improved on her opinion. Valeria had been born in this house's equivalent in Madrid. She had nearly died in this one. She had been 8 years old, the summer of 1997, and she had eaten something at a stall near the old market that her mother had told her not to eat. She had spent 4 days in the upstairs bedroom with a fever of 41, her mother sitting beside her with wet cloths, her father in the corridor on a phone that did not work well. And she had come back from it thinner and quieter and with the specific understanding, a useful one, it had turned out, that adults could be afraid. She had seen her father afraid that summer. It was the only time in her life she had seen him afraid. The memory had been a kind of foundation for her, ever since. She had not been back to the Cadiz house in 2 years. Gloria opened it. She aired the rooms. She swept the courtyard. She went to the market and came back with bread and tuna and 3 kinds of cheese and a bag of small dark olives. And by evening, the house smelled the way it had always smelled: lemon, sea salt, old stone, the faint ghost of the olive oil that had been cooked into its walls for 3 centuries. Valeria sat in the courtyard in the last of the light. She did not cry. She was not, she had come to understand, a woman who cried. She had cried her whole allotment into other rooms years ago, and what remained was something else, something older than crying, something that looked from the outside like calm, but that was really just a very long form of paying attention. She paid attention that first evening to the lemon tree. She paid attention to the way the last sun turned the courtyard wall the color of an old coin. She paid attention to the sound of Gloria's knitting needles coming from an open window upstairs. She paid attention to the fact that her hands were not shaking. She went to bed early. She slept for 11 hours. She woke up, for the first time in 11 years, without wondering where her husband was. The story of Julian Voss, meanwhile, did what stories do. It spread. It spread the way a stain spreads on linen, slow at first, then suddenly everywhere at once. By the Monday morning after the gala, every newspaper in Spain had the story on the front page, and by Tuesday, every newspaper in Europe had it on the front page, and by Thursday, the Wall Street Journal had it on page 1 of the business section with a photograph of Julian that had been taken at Davos in 2019, a photograph in which he was laughing at something somebody had said, and the caption under it, Julian would read later that week in a serviced apartment in a neighborhood he had never previously visited, simply said Julian Voss, in better days. The girl, Camilla, held her promise. She named 7 women. She named them one at a time, across 5 interviews, in a release strategy that her new publicist, a shark of a woman named Inmaculada, who had been fired from Telva in 2017 for exactly this kind of instinct, and who had been waiting 6 years for a client who would let her use it, had orchestrated with the calm precision of a general planning a small, winnable war. Each name came with a date. Each date came with a hotel. Each hotel came with a detail that was small enough to be deniable and specific enough to be true. Somewhere around name number 4, a Portuguese heiress whose grandfather had built an airline, the story stopped being about Julian's marriage and became, instead, about Julian's pattern. This was, Valeria's father would observe in a phone call on the Friday, the point at which Julian Voss as a public figure stopped existing. A man can survive a scandal, mija. A man cannot survive a pattern. A scandal is weather. A pattern is climate. The board of Voss Holdings, which, it turned out, did actually exist in a vestigial form and had been quietly reconstituted over the weekend by lawyers, Valeria had never met, but whose fees she was certain had been paid by her father, announced on Tuesday that they had accepted Julian's resignation, effective the previous Saturday, and that an interim CEO had been appointed, a woman named Alba Serrano Vidal, 51 years old, previously head of the Valencia division, a woman who Valeria had met twice at company dinners, and whom she remembered as having a dry laugh and a habit of listening very carefully before she spoke. Alba Serrano Vidal had been, Valeria realized the moment she saw the announcement, one of hers, not in any contractual sense. But Valeria had put Alba in front of 3 investors at 3 dinners over the course of 4 years. And Alba had remembered, and Alba had risen, and Alba was now running the company Julian had been pushed out of, and Alba would, Valeria suspected, do a better job of running it than Julian had ever done. The new CEO called Valeria on the Wednesday. The call came through Rafael Santarén, because that was how calls to Valeria came now, filtered through men in offices she did not enter. And Santarén's assistant asked whether Senora Draven would be willing to speak to Senora Serrano Vidal for 10 minutes that afternoon. And Valeria said yes, and at 4 o'clock the phone in the Cadi's house rang, and Valeria picked it up, and Alba Serrano Vidal said, Senora Draven. Senora Serrano Vidal, I will not waste your time. I understand that you have stepped away. I respect that. I am calling for one reason. I want you to know that I know what you did for this company for the last 11 years. I know who brought the Greeks. I know who brought the Argentines. I know who brought me 3 years ago to a dinner at a hotel in Bilbao. I want you to know that I know, and I want you to know that I will not let it be forgotten. Valeria was quiet for a moment. Thank you, Alba. I will not speak publicly about it. I understand that is not what you want. It is not. But I will not let it be forgotten inside the company. Thank you. A small pause. Then Alba said more softly, Senora Draven, are you all right? It was the first time anyone had asked her that since the microphone. Her father had not asked. Santarén had not asked. Gloria had not asked, because Gloria did not ask questions. Gloria made you soup and let you answer them yourself. And Mateo did not ask, because Mateo's entire function in her life was to be present, not to be curious. Alba Serrano Vidal, a woman Valeria had met twice, had asked. I will be, Valeria said. Thank you. Good. They talked for 3 more minutes. About nothing in particular. About Cadiz in November. About the best bakery near the Plaza de las Flores. They hung up. Valeria sat with the phone in her hand for a long moment afterward. She thought about the fact that the first kind words spoken to her since the gala had come from a stranger. She did not think this was sad. She thought instead that this was how the world worked, that the kindness that reached you in bad times did not always come from where you expected it, that sometimes the people you had helped without remembering you had helped them were the ones who remembered for you, and that this was, maybe, the best argument for being kind in the first place. Not because it came back to you. It did not always come back to you. But sometimes, on a Wednesday afternoon in a house by the sea, a woman you had once put in front of the right dinner called you up 11 years later and asked if you were all right. That was enough. That was the shape of it. But us. Julian Voss spent the 7 days. He spent them badly, but he spent them. He packed what he could. He left what he could not, which turned out to be most of it. The art, the furniture, the wine cellar, the small collection of first editions in the library, because the undertaking had specified that personal effects only could be removed, and a firm engaged by the interested family would be assessing, on the Friday afternoon, which items qualified as personal and which did not. The assessment was not subject to appeal. On the Thursday, he called Diego. Diego did not answer. On the Friday morning, a woman from Diego's firm called back. Diego, she explained, was no longer available to represent Senor Voss. Diego had resigned the account on the Sunday. There was a list of other firms he might try. She read the list. None of them, Julian understood immediately, were firms that actually took clients like him. They were firms for the provincial middle class. They were firms for people who had been hit by cars. Is there anyone in Madrid, Senor Voss? I am not in a position to give you that kind of advice. Barcelona, then. I am not in a position, Senor Voss, to give you any advice at all. I am calling as a courtesy. Good afternoon. She hung up. He sat with the phone. He understood by Friday noon that the word had moved, that somewhere in the last 6 days an invisible piece of paper had been circulated and that his name was on the wrong side of it. He was not being sued. He was not being charged with anything. He was simply, quietly, comprehensively not being taken. On the Friday evening, he left the penthouse. He took 2 suitcases. He took a leather folder of documents he thought might matter. He took his watches, the good ones, not the great ones, because the great ones were in a safe whose combination, he realized on the Tuesday, had been changed at some point in the last week by someone who was not him. He did not try to force the safe. He had understood, looking at the new keypad, that the safe was not his anymore, and that whoever had changed the combination knew exactly what was inside it, and that whatever he lost in that safe was a down payment on being allowed to walk out of the penthouse without being stopped. Federico was not at the door when he left. There was a different doorman, a younger man. He did not look at Julian. He opened the door. Julian walked out. The door closed. The service department Julian moved into was in a neighborhood called Vallecas. He had never been to Vallecas before in his life. He had chosen it because it was far from Calle Velázquez and because the rental agent who had taken his call, the third one he had tried, the first 2 having not called him back, had said, in a voice carefully emptied of curiosity, that Vallecas was the only neighborhood in Madrid where she currently had a unit available on short notice, and he had understood what she was really saying, which was that the other neighborhoods had looked up his name. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building with no elevator. It had 1 bedroom. The bedroom had a single bed. The sheets were gray and thin, a kind of polyester blend that Julian had not touched since his 20s, and that first night, lying under them, he remembered, with a clarity that surprised him, that almost made him laugh, the sheets on the fold-out bed where his father had slept in his apartment in Bilbao, which had been exactly the same kind of sheets, which had probably been exactly the same brand. He did not laugh. He lay in the gray sheets in the small apartment, and he listened to the sounds of a building in Vallecas on a Friday night. A child crying 1 floor up, a woman shouting in what sounded like Wolof 2 floors up, a television somewhere, playing football. And he thought about his father's paper napkin, and he thought about his wife's dignity, and he thought about the 7 names he did not recognize on the list on her desk, and he understood at some point around 2 in the morning that he was not going to kill himself. He had not thought he was going to, but he had been aware the last 4 days that the option was standing somewhere in the doorway of his mind, waiting to see whether it would be invited in. Around 2 in the morning on that first night in Vallecas, he looked at the option, and the option looked back at him, and he said out loud, in the dark, in a voice that cracked a little, "No." The option left. It did not come back. This was not, he would realize later, the same thing as healing. Healing was going to take years. Healing was going to involve, among other things, a therapist in a small office near Atocha, whom he would begin seeing in the middle of January, and who would tell him, on the 4th session, that the reason he had cried at his wife's writing desk was not that he had loved her. He had not loved her, the therapist would say, and Julian would not argue, because arguing would have required him to produce evidence he did not have, but that he had mistaken the feeling of being safe around her for love, and that what he was mourning, on the afternoon of that 4th session, was not the loss of his wife, but the loss of the only person in his adult life who had ever made him feel safe without asking anything in return. The therapist would say at the end of that session that this was a sad thing, and that it was also an ordinary thing, and that Julian had better get used to sitting in rooms where sad and ordinary were the same room. Julian would not like the therapist. He would keep going anyway. That was Julian's story in the end. Not a great story. A modest one. A man who had lost a city and had moved to a neighborhood in that city he had never noticed, and who had, slowly, across many months, begun to become a smaller and more honest person than he had been, not because he was brave, but because he had run out of other options. The newspapers stopped writing about him around February. By April, he was a trivia answer. By the following autumn, he was, for most people, simply the name of a man they dimly remembered having been famous for something embarrassing once. He would live another 30 years. He would remarry, eventually, a woman he met in a bookstore in Zaragoza, and she would not be glamorous, and she would not know who he had been, and he would love her, quietly and without drama, for the last 14 years of his life. He would not see Valeria Draven again, not in person, not in any newspaper, because Valeria Draven would, by then, have become a person the newspapers did not know how to find. Valeria stayed in Cadiz for 5 weeks. It had been meant to be 1 month. She extended it by a week, And then a few days on top of that, and she walked along the seawall every morning at 7:30 in a coat that had belonged to her mother, and she began gradually to be a person again. She did not become in those 5 weeks a different person. That was not how it worked. The idea that catastrophe transforms you, that the bad thing happens and a new, wiser, steadier you steps out of the wreckage, was something Valeria had never believed in, and she did not start believing in it now. What the bad thing had done for her was reveal. It had cleaned the glass. The woman who walked along the Cadiz seawall in November was not a better version of the woman who had walked into the Palacio de Aurora in October. She was, more exactly, the same woman, with fewer things in the way. She thought about this on the mornings she walked. She thought about the years she had spent in Madrid, arranging rooms for a husband who had not thought of her as a person who arranged anything. She thought about the fact that she had not resented this at the time. That was the strangest part, in retrospect. She had not resented it. She had enjoyed it, in a way. It had been her craft. Making deals happen by making dinners happen. Making dinners happen by knowing who should sit next to whom, and what the Lebanese woman's dead brother's name was, and whether the Austrian drank red or white. She had been good at it. She had been, in her way, a great professional. The fact that Julian had not understood any of this was not, she understood now, actually the injury. The injury was that she had, for 11 years, agreed with him. She had agreed by her silence that what she did not count. She had carried that silence. She had for a while even agreed with the silence. She would not do that again. Not with Julian, because Julian was gone. With the next thing, whatever it was. On the morning of her 3rd week in Cadiz, she bought a notebook at a stationery shop on Calle Ancha. It was an ordinary notebook, black, with a grosgrain ribbon and unlined cream pages, and she paid €4.80 for it, which was the first time in several years she had paid for anything herself with a physical card that had her own single name on it. She took the notebook home. She sat at the desk in the upstairs bedroom, the desk her grandmother had used, a small walnut secretary with 3 drawers, and she opened the notebook to the first page and she wrote at the top, in black ink, "Things I know about how power actually moves." Underneath that, she began to write. She wrote the first day for 2 hours. She wrote the second day for 4. She was not writing a book. She was not writing a memoir. She was not writing anything that anybody else would ever read, necessarily. She was writing for the first time in her life in her own voice, without an audience, without a strategy, without the calibration of a room. She was writing what she knew about money, about favors, about the particular geometry of a Madrid dinner party and the way the conversation moved around the table depending on who had been seated where, about her father's arithmetic, about her mother's silences, about the 11 years she had spent building an empire for a man who had not noticed, about the 4 years before that, the 4 men above Julian on her list. She wrote about them too, about what each of them had taught her, about the specific kind of disappointment each had been. She wrote because Cadiz in November was quiet and there was nothing else to do. She wrote because she was coming to understand she had never in her life put her own thoughts onto a piece of paper that was not a tactical document. She wrote because the notebook, at €4.80, was the cheapest honest thing she had ever bought. By the time she went back to Madrid, the notebook was 2/3 full. She went back on the 23rd of December. The train was full of people going home for Christmas, families mostly, with tired children and complicated bags. And Valeria sat in her compartment with Gloria across from her, and she watched the same fields and the same villages and the same olive groves going by in the other direction. And she understood, somewhere around Cordoba, that she was going home too. Not to Julian's home, not to Calle Velázquez, to the Calle Almagro house, where her father was waiting, where her grandmother had died, where she herself had been born, where her mother's pearl stud still sat in a small drawer in a small room on the 2nd floor in a place that had not been disturbed in nearly 20 years. Her father met her at Atocha. This was, she realized as she saw him standing at the end of the platform in his long, dark coat, a thing he had not done in a decade. He did not meet people at stations. Stations were for drivers and for assistants. Augusto Draven did not stand in public places to wait for anyone. He was standing in the station that afternoon, though. He was waiting for his daughter. Papa? Mija. He embraced her, briefly, in public. This was also a thing he did not do. She felt against her cheek the faint cold of his coat, and underneath it the warmth of his shoulder, and she understood, with the kind of understanding that did not need words, that her father had been, these last 5 weeks, more worried about her than he had been willing to say on the phone. "You look well," he said. "I am well." "Good." He took her bag from Mateo. He carried it himself. He walked her, personally, through the station to the car. At the car, he opened the door for her, the way he had opened the door for her when she was a teenager, and he did not make a thing of it, and she did not make a thing of it, and she got in. Buzz. The first board she sat on her own name for was a small one. It was the foundation. Her mother's foundation, which her mother had established in 1999, and which had been drifting along for 26 years under the passive management of a small staff and a family friend named Ricardo, who was, by the time Valeria came back from Cadiz, 79 years old and eager to retire. The foundation did 3 things. It funded a music school for working-class children in Carabanchel. It ran a small grant program for women returning to work after leaving abusive relationships. And it underwrote the restoration of a single crumbling convent in Salamanca that had been attached, somehow, to Valeria's grandmother's family in the 1880s. The foundation had an annual budget of 11 million euros. It had been doing almost exactly the same work, at almost exactly the same budget, for 2 decades. Valeria became chair in February. She did not fire Ricardo. She kept him on as an advisor, and she raised his honorarium, and she let him come to the monthly meetings and say what he wanted to say, because Ricardo had loved her mother and had carried the foundation through years when nobody else had carried anything, and she did not believe in removing old men from rooms where they had been useful. But she took the chair, and she hired 3 new people, and by the end of her first quarter, the foundation's budget had tripled. Not because her father had given her the money. He had not. This was a line she had drawn, and he had respected it. But because she had, in the 7 weeks since returning from Cadiz, personally visited 11 people whose dinners she had once arranged, and had asked each of them for a specific sum for a specific program, and not one of them had said no. This was, she understood, the real start. Not Voss Holdings, which was not hers, and which had never been hers, and which she did not particularly want. A foundation for returning women, a music school, a convent. Small, unspectacular things that made unspectacular differences to unspectacular lives, and that had her mother's name on the door. She gave an interview that spring to El País Semanal. It was the first interview she had given to anyone since the press conference. It ran for 6,000 words. It did not mention Julian Voss. It did not mention her father. It did not mention, in fact, any man by name. It was about the foundation. It was about the music school. It was about the fact that the women in the Returning to Work program did not need what people thought they needed, which was inspirational speeches and leadership seminars, but rather bus fare and daycare and somebody to watch their kids on Tuesday evenings so they could take a night class without apologizing to anybody. The interview was picked up in France and translated. It was picked up in Italy and translated. It was read in Mexico City by a woman who ran a similar foundation and who wrote to Valeria and asked if she would come in the autumn to speak. Valeria went. She had not given a speech since her university days. She was bad at it, at first. She did not have the pitcher's voice that her husband had had, the easy-carrying sound that filled rooms. Her voice was quieter than that. It made people lean in. She came to understand after the 3rd or 4th speech that leaning in was a thing she had always made people do, and that she had confused it for years with a flaw, with not being loud enough, when in fact it was a tool, and it had always been a tool, and it had only ever been a problem when the man next to her had treated it like one. She stopped apologizing for her voice. She got better at speeches. By the end of the following year, she was sitting on 3 boards in her own name. By the end of the year after that, 5. She did not run any of them. She did not want to. She had learned through 11 years of a bad marriage that she was not a CEO. She was a connector, a maker of rooms. She came to understand without any sentimentality about it, her father's daughter. Not in the sense of being a kingpin, because she was not. She had no appetite for that. She had no capacity for it. But in the sense of being a person who made things happen by knowing who should be where, when, and why. There was a word for what she was. Not a grand word. Fixer, maybe, in its oldest and best sense. the kind of fixer who does not break things. She never remarried. She had romances across the years, a long warm one with a Portuguese architect when she was 41, a shorter one with a French journalist when she was 46, and finally when she was 52, she began a quiet and private arrangement with a man named Tomas, who had been her grandmother's doctor's son, a widower with 2 grown children, who had loved her, quietly, since they were both 16, and who had waited without telling her and without marrying anyone else, and who simply appeared one afternoon on the sidewalk outside the foundation's offices, with a bunch of white flowers in his hand, the November she turned 52, and had said, "Valeria, I have been patient long enough. Will you come have dinner with me?" She had laughed. She had gone to dinner. She had kept going to dinner for the next 22 years. And when Tomas died in the winter she was 74, she buried him quietly in the small cemetery of his family village in Cantabria. And she wore black for a year, and she did not perform her grief in public. And she was, by then, a woman so accustomed to being the only one who knew what she was feeling that the privacy of her mourning was, in its way, one of her great pleasures. But that was all much later. In the spring of the year after the gala, the spring when she was 37, the spring when her first interview ran in El País Semanal, she was still, in most practical ways, a woman just learning the shape of her own free time. She walked, on a Tuesday afternoon in April, through the Retiro Park. She had no meetings. She had not arranged her schedule around anybody else's. The trees in the Retiro were just coming into their green. The light was the long, slow light of a Madrid April, low and gold at the edges, and she walked past the rose garden and past the big crystal palace and past the pond where the rowing boats were starting, for the season, to come out of storage. And she thought, not for the first time, but for the first time without any sadness at all, that she had spent 11 years of her life building an empire for a man who had not asked her name on any of it, and that the empire was gone now, and that the man was gone, and that what was left, which was her, which was Valeria Draven on a bench in the Retiro at 4 in the afternoon on an ordinary Tuesday, was actually more than she had ever owned at any point in the 11 years. She thought about her father. He would die, she did not yet know. In 6 years, quietly, in his sleep, in the study on Calle Almagro, with the lamp still on. She would be the one to find him. He would have left her, on the desk, a single envelope, inside which would be a single piece of paper, on which would be written, in his handwriting, "Mija, you already know everything you needed me to tell you. I am proud of you. Close the lamp." She would close the lamp. She would weep, for the first and only time in her adult life, for the length of a single afternoon, in the chair he had sat in for 40 years. And then she would get up. She would bury him. She would inherit, under Spanish law, what was legal for her to inherit. And she would quietly disperse, through a network of lawyers and shell companies, what was not. Not because she was a moralist, but because she was realistic. And she understood that the world her father had operated in was not the world she wanted to run, and that keeping the useful pieces and releasing the rest was both the kindest and the shrewdest thing she could do with what he left her. She would do it. It would take her 4 years. By the time she was finished, the name Draven, in the specific sense her father had made it famous, would effectively not exist anymore. And the name Draven, in the sense her mother had made it mean, the foundation's name, would have more than doubled what it was doing. But all of that was in the future, and the future was not something Valeria Draven had ever been able to see clearly. She had only ever been able to see the next good room, which is, she had come to understand, enough for anyone. You did not need to see your whole life. You needed to see what was in front of you clearly, and you needed to walk into it on your own feet without apologizing for being there. She got up from the bench. She walked back across the park, toward the gate where Mateo was waiting, because Mateo would always be waiting for the rest of her life. Until the afternoon in her 81st year, when it would be her who waited, gently, at the hospital bed of a man who had driven her, in total, across 52 years, the equivalent of 12 times around the world. She walked unhurriedly. She watched the children on their bicycles. She watched a pair of old men playing chess on a fold-out table under a plane tree. She watched a young woman feeding ducks. And then, because one of the ducks got aggressive and pecked the young woman on the ankle, Valeria watched the young woman curse, loudly, in a Madrid accent that could have etched glass, and Valeria laughed out loud on the path. It was a real laugh. Not the small, polite smile she had learned to wear at galas, not the close-lipped smile she had given her husband. a real laugh, startled out of her by a real thing. The kind of laugh she had not laughed since she was 25 years old in a hotel in Barcelona. She was going to be all right. That was the thing she understood on the path in the Retiro on that Tuesday afternoon in April. Not that she was happy. Happy was a simpler word, and she was not a simple woman, and she had not, since the age of about 17, trusted simple words, but that she was going to be all right, that the damage had not gone all the way through, that the young woman who had laughed at the soup joke was still somewhere inside her, not dead, just quieter, just waiting her turn, that the betrayal had not been the point of the story. The betrayal had been, in the end, the occasion of the story, the reason the story had been told, the reason the microphone had been picked up, the reason Valeria Draven had walked out of the Palacio de Aurora without stumbling and had walked into the press conference at Voss Holdings without looking at the cameras, and had walked along the sea wall in Cadiz at 7:30 in the morning and had bought a €4.80 notebook in a stationery shop and had written in it, for the first time in her life, things she knew. The betrayal had cracked the wall. But the wall had needed cracking. She had known it had needed cracking. She had been waiting, without quite admitting to herself that she was waiting, for a crack big enough to walk through. Julian had provided it. He had done it stupidly. He had done it cruelly. He had done it with a microphone in front of 480 people in a dress the wrong color. He had been, from beginning to end, an unworthy occasion. This, too, was a thing Valeria understood, and this, too, was a thing that did not make her sad. The world did not always give you dignified occasions. Sometimes the door that opened was opened by somebody you would never have chosen to open it. The door was still the door. What mattered was that you walked through it. She had walked through it. That was the whole of the story. On the path in the Retiro, she passed a young woman, not the one who had been pecked, a different one, 18 or 19, sitting on a bench with a book, reading with the specific hunched intensity of a student trying to finish a chapter before she had to go back to a class she did not love. Valeria paused. She did not stop exactly, but she slowed for a second. The young woman did not look up. The young woman was reading the book. The young woman's hair had fallen over her face, and she had pushed it back with the same absent gesture Valeria had used at that age. And Valeria felt for a moment the specific strange vertigo of seeing, on a bench in the Retiro, a girl who was not her but who might, in 20 years, become a woman walking past a different bench, looking at a different girl. Valeria thought, walking past, I hope you never have to learn what I had to learn. And then she thought, but if you do, I hope you remember that the woman who walks out of the room is not the same woman who was sitting in it. I hope you remember that the damage is not the story. I hope you remember that the door is still the door. She kept walking. She reached the gate. Mateo was waiting. He opened the door of the car. She got in. They drove back through the late afternoon light to the house on Calle Almagro, where a lamp had been burning for 36 years, where her father was waiting in the study to hear about her day, where Gloria was making lentils with chorizo because Gloria was always making lentils with chorizo, where the future she could not yet see was waiting, patiently, for her to walk into it one room at a time. The gate of the Calle Almagro house closed behind the car at 6:47 p.m. Somewhere across the city, in a small apartment in Vallecas, a man named Julian was sitting at a table, alone, eating a plate of fried eggs he had cooked for himself, and understanding slowly that fried eggs were a thing a grown man could do for himself, and that he had not done them in 20 years, and that the doing of them was a small, modest, ordinary dignity, and that dignity, the word his wife had used, the word that had traveled through a microphone in a conference room on a Sunday morning, and into his chest, and had never quite left him since. Dignity was not a thing that other people gave you. Dignity was a thing you cooked for yourself, late, at a table, with cheap eggs, in a neighborhood where nobody knew your name. He would learn that lesson, slowly, across years, inadequately. The way men like him learned things, which was to say with resistance, with relapses, with the occasional small relief of feeling, for the length of a cigarette, that he was almost the kind of person his wife had believed him to be on the night she laughed at the soup joke in Barcelona. He was never going to be that person, but he was, in his way, going to try. And the trying, even though it would not redeem him, even though it would not in any large cosmic sense balance the scales of the 11 years, was, it turned out, not nothing. It was, in fact, the most anybody could ever truthfully ask of anyone. This, in the end, was the shape of what happened. A man betrayed his wife, publicly, cruelly, in a room full of light. A wife turned out, in that moment, to be something other than what the man had thought she was. A father loved his daughter with the exact, calibrated, terrible patience of a man who had been waiting for 11 years to be asked. A city watched. A country watched. The story moved through newspapers and across borders, and people who did not know any of the three of them talked about them at dinner tables for a season, and then talked about other people, and then forgot. The wife went to the sea for 5 weeks and came back. The husband moved to a neighborhood he had not known existed and stayed there, and slowly became smaller and more honest and less important, which was, for him, the first honest thing he had ever become. The father closed his lamp eventually and died in his chair. And the daughter, who had been, all along, the person the story had been about, even though nobody watching had known it, even though she herself had not known it until a microphone was lifted in a ballroom on a Saturday night in October. The daughter walked through her life, one room at a time, on her own feet, on her own name, and when she died, at 86, in the upstairs bedroom of the house in Cadiz, where she had nearly died at 8, the paper in the city of her birth printed a single line at the bottom of the obituary page, and the line read, in small neat type, Valeria Draven, 86. She did her work. It was the whole of what she had wanted anyone to say. It was enough.